right?
Yes, that's correct. There will be a question and answer box, both on Whova and as well as Zoom, where people can use for questions.
Okay, so with that preamble, I invite Joy Hazel, who is a Sea Grant Extension agent and is also pursuing her PhD and doing some exciting work at the University of Florida concerning a FAD fishery in terms of determining property rights. So please take it away.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to put on my timer so I stick to 3 minutes. Hi, everybody. It's very exciting to be your first panel speaker for this conference and exciting to see you virtually, although I know if anybody feels the way I did, I would much rather have this in person. I'm still grateful for the opportunity. My research focused on the island nation of Dominica, not the Dominican Republic. The Commonwealth of Dominica is in the Lesser Antilles in the Eastern Caribbean. It has a population of approximately 70,000 people. And my work explored the impacts of a change in governance model from predominantly self-governance to co-management in the fish aggregation device fishery, which I'll now call the FAD fishery. Originally from the 1980s up until the early 2010s, this was largely a private or group deployed FAD fishery with a few government deployed FADs sprinkled in. And the private and group FADs had the opportunity to create a set of practices that basically created property rights around these FADs. And I won't go into those details, that will take too long. And then in the early 2010s, with a grant from JICA, the government embarked on a co-management system. And the co-management system, once they went through all of the stakeholder engagement processes, settled on a FAD licensing system. And so now all FADs became public, even those that had been previously deployed by private or groups, small groups. And to get into the FAD fishery, you had to purchase a FAD license yearly at 500 EC dollars, Eastern Caribbean dollars. This change led to both intended and unintended consequences. On the positive note, it really lowered the cost of entry to the fishery, which allowed for a younger group and more entrepreneurial, can never pronounce that, group of fishers to enter the fishery. On the negative side, it stopped the ability of people to protect their substantial, sometimes from 2,000 up to 6,000 Eastern Caribbean dollar FADs. And there was an unintended consequence that people did not necessarily adhere to purchasing a FAD license, but still felt like they had the right to fish all the FADs in the sea. So while it decreased some conflict, it opened up some others. And so that was the research that I did. And I think I have a couple of seconds left, but I'll end it there. That's the brief overview.
Okay, great. Thanks, Joy. Thanks for staying on time. Okay, our next speaker is going to be Stacey McDonald, who is an environmental psychologist and works with nature-based solutions. She's working in the Bonaire, and we'll be talking about her work via assignment for the World Wildlife Fund. So please take it away.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for being present. Or I want to say that I'm grateful that I can be present today. So I will also try to stay within the time limit of 3 minutes. And instead of giving a full summary of my presentation, I want to continue my presentation a little bit. I feel that I left it at a bit of a cliffhanger, not truly answering the question whether co-management on Bonaire is a success or not. To give a brief summary anyway, I work for the WWNF, and since 2017, I've been supporting the WWNF in the process of trying to establish co-management on the island of Bonaire. We also work on Saba and Sinter stations, but Bonaire is currently where I'm based. And during this whole process of making an inventory on how we can stimulate the island to produce a more sustainable fisheries, one of the main conclusions we drew was that the fishermen themselves weren't involved sufficiently. And the main argument that was presented to us was that the fishermen weren't organized, they were not in a cooperative or some kind of form of organization, which made it very difficult for other institutions such as the government to reach them. So what we focused on initially was trying to establish a fisheries cooperative, because that was presented as the reason that if the fishers are organized, then all problems will be solved. Well, I think you can imagine that this is not necessarily the case, even though we were successful in establishing a fisheries cooperative through participatory action research, and really working closely with the fishermen. We now know that that is not the only silver bullet to establishing co-management on the islands. And that was concluded within a second study we did with the WWNF, where we really evaluated the conditions for co-management on Bonaire, and also on Sabins interstages. And one of the main conclusions is that the biggest bottlenecks currently is that it's not always clear whether the responsible parties for fisheries management feel there's a real big urgency to manage the sector, and there's really not enough willingness to collaborate between the fishermen and the government to collaborate with each other. So that it's also very personal. So depending on the personal relationships between the fishermen and the people that are placed within the government, that really is a big determinant for the extent to which the sectors or the how do you say it, the different stakeholders are willing to collaborate with each other. Even though fishermen now or the fisheries cooperative Piscabon is acknowledged as a representative of the fishermen, and even though it's easier for other parties to connect with the fishermen, the lack of trust that is still very present on the island is still a big, big reason why co-management isn't successful as of yet right now. So that is something that we're working on. And a final note is that it has led to more successful outcomes as well. And I think that is a nice link to our previous presentation, because very recently the fishermen deployed 6 VATs in the waters of Bonaire. And they are being managed by the fisheries cooperative themselves. Fishermen can use them right now. And that was really an outcome of them having a cooperative and trying to work on those relationships with the different stakeholders on the island to co-manage the sector. So it can lead to positive outcomes, but it's still quite challenging due to the lack of trust and between the different stakeholders.
Okay, great. Thank you, Stacey. We'll move on. Our next speaker is Anna Barbosa. She is a recent graduate from a program in Marine Applied Ecology and Conservation, and she's going to be talking about income diversification projects effectively in the Mesoamerican Reef region, looking at alternative livelihood projects within that region. So please take it away, Anna.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Oh, perfect. Okay, thank you so much for your attention, and thank you so much, GCFI, for the opportunity to participate with this conference. So the other co-author for my research is Dr. Antonella Rivera of the Coral Reef Alliance. And so just to begin, I'm sure everyone's familiar, but alternative livelihood projects kind of promote revenue streams that are less natural resource dependent as a way to reduce pressure on natural resources. So these were really the projects that we were targeting within the Mesoamerican Reef region and other income diversification options. And what really drove this research was the limited literature documenting ALPs within the area. So there is kind of this need to establish a baseline for the region's projects and kind of fill in those gaps of information. And for the methods, I used to first map the ALPs within the region. I used kind of a general search of the ALPs to create a database. And then next, kind of to identify aspects of project progression, I used a literature review to conduct and understand what were the components of projects in general, but then identify ones within the region. And then lastly, implementers were interviewed to understand the project's components from local actors, but also to have them define success within their projects and score the success of their own projects. And from this, we kind of developed 6 themes that were extracted to kind of explore project design and kind of identify what could influence project success. And from that, we conducted a semi-quantitative analysis of these themes. So in conclusion, it kind of showed that these projects within the region have moved away from objectives that are exclusively related to conservation and instead are kind of more affiliated with assisting and supporting coastal communities through either economic development or capacity building. And this was also reinforced through a prevalence of projects within the region that actually work towards diversifying income rather than having fishers change livelihoods or stop fishing altogether. And this also builds on previous research that promotes kind of a change from the term alternative livelihood projects to a better suited one, such as income diversification strategies. So these successful projects that we surveyed had kind of a trend of using bottom-up and co-management styles that integrate high social capital, both vertical and horizontal. And this really highlights the importance of considering relationship structure and interactions in project design. Project financing was a major issue that was repeatedly mentioned, but particularly the limiting factor was kind of the time frame of funding and support. And beneficiaries really need to be given sufficient time and ongoing support to fully develop capacity and see the full term benefits of their projects to fully reach financial sustainability. Successful projects seem to exercise active conservation mentality and focus on increasing sustainable fishing practices. And these preliminary results also showed that most successful projects are the ones that involve the community to actively want to conserve their resources and together work towards reducing fishing dependence. So kind of a key takeaway from this research is that managers should consider social capital extensively and integrate it within project planning to promote the success of their project. So that concludes my time. I hope I'm within the time frame. Thank you so much for your attention, everyone.
Okay, great. Thank you, Anna. That is very much within the time frame. Okay, great. So we'll move on to the next speaker. Someone I know is Miranda Willis, and she's going to be talking about some research that she did while here at the University of Miami as a graduate student on a review of the Florida limited entry marine life fishery sectors. So take it away, Miranda.
Thank you, Manoj, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining, and thank you for the opportunity to present to GCFI. So my research looked at the story behind the Florida marine life, or the tropical ornamental fishery, and its limited entry program that was established in 2005. So the Florida marine life fishery is a multi-species fishery in which there is a relatively low level of biological and ecological knowledge for most of the marine life species, which makes appropriate regulations difficult to implement. So there are no stock assessments like in other commercial food fisheries. So standing stock can be more difficult to measure. And prior to 1990, it wasn't regulated. And in 1998, the Florida Marine Life Association, or the FMLA, which consists of marine life collectors, petitioned the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, or the FWC, to essentially regulate the fishery. And what they did was they introduced endorsements. So this was in 1990. And between 1990 and 1998, the number of endorsements, so the number of participants in the fishery, rose so much, up to 726 participants to be precise, that a moratorium was established, because actually only 27% of collectors at that point, so of the 726 endorsements, only 27% were actually reporting landings. So there was a significant risk of latent effort in the fishery. And it was cause enough for concern to establish this moratorium. And what happened was there was a period of many meetings between the FWC and members of the industry, and they agreed on a goal for a limited entry program, which kind of had a strapline of use it or lose it. So they established 3 tiers to licensing, which reflected the different kinds of gear that was used in the fishery, and also the quantity of landings that had been recorded over the previous years. The collaboration didn't end there, though. They spent years after launching the limited entry program, they spent years actually establishing species-specific rules. So as of 2020, the number of collectors stands at 148. So the fishery is 20% of the size that it was. back at its peak. And focusing on this effort-based management means benefits for collectors, businesses, by reducing the race to fish mentality of an open access fishery, and also the limiting the labor units stimulates efficiency and profitability. And what we found is that the co-management, as is reported elsewhere, ensures regulatory acceptance and compliance in this case, based on trust. And management and conservation is more effective because the future sustainability of the fishery is a shared goal. And the managers benefit from the collectors' knowledge. It's, as I mentioned, it's a complex fishery, so and in return, the collectors feel a sense of stewardship of their environment and creating this high level of social capital. And just to quote one of the participants that we interviewed, the rules are fair to fishers, fair to government, and fair to the environment, and that's why it's worked very well. So thank you for your attention. Look forward to answering questions at the end.
Okay, great. Thanks, Miranda. The next speaker, I don't know if Brittany's here. Brittany Aguirre from FAU. Adila, I defer to you. Maybe she's not here. Maybe she is.
I'm not seeing her in our panelist list, so I would suggest we skip Brittany and keep things moving.
All right, very good. Okay, leave more time for discussion. Hopefully she can make it a little later if she's late. So we have Carissa Gervasi. She's a fish ecologist and has training for science policy and research, and she's focused on how natural resources can be sustainably managed while trying to meet human needs. Carissa is working on translational, I was going to say translocational, translational ecology to inform conservation principles for jack fishery in the Florida Keys. So please take it away.
All right, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name's Carissa, and I'm a PhD candidate in the Coastal Fisheries Research Lab at Florida International University. The research presented in my talk is based on this concept of translational ecology, which is a term that was coined by William Schlesinger in 2010 to describe a collaborative effort between scientists and stakeholders with the goal of rapidly translating scientific results into action. It is, in essence, a science conducted to address a specific management need, and it includes participation from stakeholders and managers throughout the research process with the goal of formulating decisions and making change. So translational ecology has the potential to help overcome many challenges that currently hinder effective recreational fisheries management, such as the assessment of data poor fisheries. And a great example is the crevalle jack fishery. The crevalle jack is a large marine fish native to coastal waters throughout the North Atlantic and Gulf of Mexico, and it is targeted by both commercial and recreational anglers. But despite its importance, the crevalle jack fishery throughout the US is currently unregulated, and little research has been done to assess the biology and ecology of this species. But in recent years, reports from recreational fishing guides in the Florida Keys at the southern tip of the state of Florida suggest a decline in crevalle jack catches, indicating management action may be warranted to conserve the population. So the translational ecology approach presented in my talk is ideally suited to studying the status and trend of such a species. And you can see in the little slide here, my research specifically aims to demonstrate that recreational fisheries management is ideally suited to application of translational ecology methods. This is because recreational fishing guides have a wealth of information about the natural environment from years of experience on the water, and they can provide valuable management relevant information. So here I present a translational ecology framework for crevalle jack management that involves several components. In the first panel A on the slide, we start with deriving local ecological knowledge from veteran fishing guides via in-depth interviews. And that wealth of data is then used to develop hypotheses about crevalle jack status and trends. We then tested those hypotheses using existing long-term data sets, and hypotheses that received support from long-term data provided confidence in the patterns observed by fishing guides and could be used to produce management recommendations. On the other hand, the hypotheses that did not receive support from long-term data allowed us to quickly identify and prioritize additional research that will enable us to provide sound management advice and hopefully come up with a good management plan for this species. So my talk provides some more detail on our methods and results. So please check that out if you haven't already. And thank you for listening.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Carissa. That was very interesting. And we'll move on to our last speaker. It's Emily Melvin. She's a PhD student at the University of Southern Mississippi. And we'll be looking at the much broader scale, talking about complicating conservation, looking at how marine genetic resources challenge the high seas biodiversity negotiations. So please take it away, Emily.
Thank you so much, and thanks everyone for your attention. So I will be talking a little bit about the role of marine genetic resources at the ongoing UN negotiations on the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. And this is a project I've been working on with Leslie Acton and Lisa Campbell. And just to begin an overview of what marine genetic resources are, these are something that were brought to these negotiations really some actors in the global South wanted to see them brought into the negotiations to bring in discussions of benefit sharing globally. And this is the definition of MGRs is still being negotiated, but it generally includes marine genetic material that has actual or potential value. One thing that is a potentially important exemption is that it may exclude commercial fisheries products. The BBNJ negotiations have a mandate not to undermine existing agreements and governing bodies. So there's a general hesitancy to include commercial fishery products because they're already governed by things like regional fisheries management organizations. So one thing that we're tracking is whether and how these negotiations will affect commercial fisheries, particularly where you may have species that have value both as a commodity as well as for their genetic materials. And ultimately, we found that marine genetic resources create challenges because they move in three different ways. First, they move from areas within national jurisdiction to areas beyond national jurisdiction. And this leaves open questions as to in what circumstances MGRs are subject to the agreement because they're in the high seas, and in what cases the states in whose waters they sometimes reside maintain some level of control. Second, MGRs move between the water column and the seafloor, and this is complicated because of the historically different management regimes that apply. While the common heritage principle has traditionally been applied to the mineral resources of the seafloor, the freedom of the high seas has been applied to the water column. So this, how marine genetic resources are characterized in this way and their movement between these areas affect whether they must be managed for the benefit of all or whether they're subject to open access. And finally, they move between the ocean and the lab because the value is not just in the material resource itself, but in translation to knowledge. And the parties dispute to what extent that knowledge should be subject to ownership through mechanisms like patent rights. So all of these types of mobility combined lead to questions about who owns the physical resource itself, for whom these resources should be managed, and who owns the knowledge relating to these resources. So under the status quo, there are already patent rights being applied by private industry. So it's really important to critically analyze who is benefiting from the existing form of governance when we think about how we're going to manage these resources going forward. And even though the specific governance mechanisms arising from these negotiations may ultimately exclude commercial fisheries, this case is still informative in thinking through the ways in which mobility affects governance across multiple contexts. So thank you for your attention, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Okay, super. Thank you, Emily. It's very interesting. Well, with that, we are done with the speakers and we can open this up to Q&A. And we do have a question from Emma. I will read this through. It's a lengthy one. She says, nice work, Anna, on livelihoods. MPA Connect has done some work on MPA management capacity to promote sustainable livelihoods in the MAR, the Mesoamerican Reef region. Although I think, she says, we like that term better than alternative. It's an important part of effective management, compliance, and building reef resilience. Natural resource managers stand to benefit from partnering with social agencies and support livelihoods, such as agencies that promote micro enterprise development, community empowerment, etc. Did you consider any links? So this is for you. Did you consider any links between livelihood options and climate change adaptations? Did you consider roles for community members in MPA management, such as park rangers, fisheries monitoring, habitat monitoring, in return for stipend as livelihood options too? Anna, do you want to address those questions for Emma?
Yes, sure thing. Thank you so much for reading it, and thank you, Emma, for asking. I'll start with the if we considered roles with community members in MPA management. We did. There was a subsection of, well, part of the research was to also kind of audit what kind of projects were available and up and running or implemented within the region. And one of the sections was research and monitoring. So that was actually the smallest category of projects that we surveyed. I believe there was only 3 projects in total that we were able to get in contact with. And all of those 3 were either fishing catch, or resource monitoring, so water quality, things like that. And then in terms of climate change adaptation and livelihood options, we did receive a lot of information from projects in terms of what their funding came from and kind of what the stipulations of their grant were that could have potentially written parts of the narrative for their project outlines. And some of them did work with grants that wanted certain goals to reach climate change adaptation. However, the projects themselves did not necessarily have kind of climate change outlined goals, if that makes sense. So for the projects that we surveyed, really the criteria was, are they working with a coastal community to diversify, create new revenue streams, or supplement revenue in any way, shape, or form. So it was quite broad. And if I believe on my infographic, that was the background to my presentation, that kind of gives the breakdown of what types of projects we were able to survey.
Okay, great. Thank you, Anna. There's a question from Christy, and it's from Miranda. She says, do you feel that reporting through the state's marine life catch database is now more accurate than it used to be?
It's a good question. I don't have the answer, unfortunately. I think in terms of being able to determine accuracy, it's quite challenging. I think I did hear from some of the collectors that the system could do with being modernized, and that, you know, there is a tendency to kind of enter information in a kind of delayed manner. I can't comment on the accuracy of it right now compared to previously. Could try and find out and get back to you, but it's the best I can do, I think.
Just to add to that a little bit, Miranda, would you say that there are more people reporting now as a result of maybe they feel more part of the process, or is that also just conjecture?
I mean, I think, yeah, given the fact that there are fewer participants, there's more, you know, it's more of a community of collectors. So I would say that there's more of a sense of responsibility to report, to make sure that when trends are being analysed by the FWC, that you know, they reflect what's being reported on the ground from collectors.
Okay, super. Thank you. This question is from Henri for Carissa. He says, in your presentation, you have a direct link between lack of local ecological knowledge to the fish path tool to inform management measures. How would the hypotheses generation with stakeholders of translational ecology fit into the whole process?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So for those of you who don't know, the fish path tool is a decision support tool that basically exists to help fishery scientists, stakeholders, and managers kind of develop an assessment and management program essentially for a fishery. So it's a web-based tool, and it has all sorts of assessment questions that you fill out about your particular fishery. So we are using stakeholder knowledge to inform that fish path assessment questionnaire. So basically to fill in kind of the data gaps that we have about how the fishery operates, how do fishermen interact with crevalle jack, what do they know about the biology and ecology of the species, things like that. And our goal with the fish path tool is to come up with a data limited stock assessment option or method that we can apply to crevalle jack and actually get some management relevant reference points that Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission can use to start developing a management plan for the species. So it's very much kind of a starting with the stakeholders on the ground and their observations, their knowledge, and trying to take that to the end goal of developing a management plan.
Okay, thanks, Carissa. Actually, there's a follow-up, and it's not really a follow-up, but it's a question that has follow-up in it. So this is from Nancy. She says, have you followed up with the guides and I guess other stakeholders that you originally interviewed to let know some of your findings and maybe even the ultimate management decisions?
Yes, yeah, and that's a really important part of the whole process, I think. So we are regularly communicating with these stakeholders. We send them a lot of email updates, and in the Florida Keys, they actually have a couple of fishing guide associations, groups throughout the Keys that get fishing guides together, and they usually have meetings once or twice a year, and they've been inviting us to give presentations at those meetings. So we do try to stay really involved and keep them updated on our process. They were very involved with helping us collect samples of crevalle jack for different components of the project. So yeah, they've definitely been kind of with us through the beginning. And we're also going to use their observations and kind of letters of support from them to present to FWC when we kind of try to figure out the management process. So yeah, it's a very stakeholder driven process, and we're working really closely with them.
Okay, great. Thank you. There are several questions for Joy, but I think they kind of fit into the same sort of category. So Joy, can you speak a little bit about, so this is from Emily, and Henri also has one. Says, can you speak a bit more about the process by which the transition from private to public FADs took place? Was there compensation for the private owners of FADs as they transitioned, from, I guess, to a public system? And in your talk, you mentioned the possibility of a hybrid system, whether it be public and private FADs. Can you speak a bit more to that? And Henri asked pretty much the same question, which is, did the government of Dominica consider compensating FAD fishers for the loss of investment when going public?
Sure. So to the first question, great questions. So the first questions, which are the sort of the transition and whether or not private FAD owners were compensated. The transition took place over several years, and it should be noted that in the process of transitioning, there was also significant investment in deployment of public FADs. So there was an increase in FADs overall. And of course, the license fee was to keep up the FADs. They take a lot of maintenance and often replacement. And Maria hit in the middle of this project too. So that was a whole nother layer. I do not know if the government considered compensating the FAD fishers, but I know they didn't compensate the FAD fishers. It was just a transition, and they did do a long series of stakeholder engagement process and education to do this transition. In the talk I mentioned, so my research showed that there was a real loss to the private fad owners in their ability to protect their investments, essentially. And I should note that the private fads were not exclusively private. For those who haven't seen it, there was ways that others could use their fads, but there was systems in place to continue with the management and compensation. So my hypothesis is that people who have deployed private fads could still maintain that private system. They could implement the rules in writing. So for example, if I want to use Stacy's fad, there's an agreement that either I ask her directly and I compensate her in some way from the catch, or I provide her with some sort of maintenance or monitoring of the fad. So put those rules, those informal rules, formalize them, while still maintaining this public fad system with the licensure if people don't want to create that investment into the fads. I mentioned Maria. It is worth noting at the conclusion of my research study, 4 months later, Maria hit. And so the Fisheries Division of the government of Dominica understandably transitioned away from this co-management structure into rebuilding their fisheries, which they've been pretty successful at. So I hope that answered the questions.
Yeah, it did. If I can ask a follow-up there, how well were the private fads actually enforced? On the issue of leaving gear out there, how much poaching was there?
You know, there was probably a decent. So historically, the fads were limited to smaller communities, and there was less people who had access to them. And so they did a lot of controlling access through distance. So a fad, one of my communities of study, would place a fad relatively close to shore, so within 1 to 5 miles, with the kind of acknowledgement that that one would be poached, it would be used. And they would place other fads further offshore because there were limited, the machines, the engines had limited power and couldn't access those. And again, they didn't, it's sort of hard to explain, because when I presented this back to the fisheries cooperatives that I worked with, they were like, yeah, that's true, but we do let other people use our fads. And so it's a tiny island, right? It's 70,000 people. Everybody knows everybody. Every place I went, they're like, oh, you're the walking white girl, like, because I walked everywhere. And so there was a lot of communication, particularly within study sites. So within fish landing sites, there was a lot of communication and agreement. And then they would have sort of communication and agreements with fish landing sites next to them. As people started increasing their engine power, that's when more conflict came into play, because different study sites that were further away did not have the same understanding of the norms that were in place. And that's where the poaching really became a problem. And there was some violence at sea, ramming of boats and other things as a result of trying to protect their resources. So the government had a real incentive to try to reduce that conflict through a change in governance.
Sorry, just one more quick follow-up before we move on, but has the government considered zoning, like to make certain fads more a priority for certain communities and place them accordingly?
They haven't. I mean, the zoning is somewhat de facto because of people's ability to get to them, although again, the engines are getting bigger and bigger. To my knowledge, they haven't. I shouldn't say that they haven't explicitly, but that was sort of the de facto system that was in place prior to this change in governance, right? It was almost de facto TERFs, right? Territorial use right fisheries. I can never get that one right. Yeah, so, but to my knowledge, they have not considered it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next question comes from Leslie. It's got a preamble before, so I'll read it out. So this is for a number of the panelists. So for many of you spoke about working with stakeholders and governance through things like co-management and co-production of knowledge for management decision-making. To what extent rather, did resource users engage with these processes broadly? Was there any pushback to engagement? Did engagement levels change over time? And did you get a sense of the extent to which users considered these mechanisms successful or unsuccessful? And if so, in what ways? So this is open to the entire group, the entire panel.
I would like to have a go, if the others are okay with that. So yeah, what I noticed is that whenever I would explain the term or the concept of co-management to the stakeholders, initially they would all get very well, they would respond very positively. They liked the idea of collaborating, and they also acknowledged the fact that that was the only way that they could properly come to some kind of management form for the fishery sector on Bonaire. The thing is, on Bonaire, the fishery sector had been neglected in terms of management for many, many years. So in basic needs, but also in terms of making it more sustainable. And a lot of pressure was placed, or a lot of arguments were presented that was due to lack of cooperation of the fishermen. And that is why we focus so much attention on establishing a cooperative to make it more, to make the process a bit easier for other stakeholders to engage with the fishermen. So there was like one organized group for them to contact. And initially they were all very positive that this development took place. I think many stakeholders still are. But what you kind of notice now is that when the collaboration isn't going as smoothly, they also tend to go back to their old ways to just contact one fisherman directly to set up a project. For example, the government will just maybe contact one singular fisherman and say, hey, we want to do this because the cooperative is not willing to collaborate with us on this project. So can you help us out? And that is creating a new dynamic and new tensions again within the field. So in terms of building that arena of trust where all stakeholders are becoming equal, so to say, or at least equal partners in the process, that is really still a challenge, at least here on Bonaire, but I also noticed it on Ceiba and Statia as well. So it's successful in the sense that if you look at smaller projects, they can succeed, and the fishermen are now being acknowledged and they are being involved in various processes. But it also becomes unsuccessful that if they don't agree with certain decisions that are being made from more a government level, so to say, there's still a lot of friction and setback, like, okay, we don't want to work with them, or they are then they are being scapegoated sometimes. So I don't know, I'm still very much in the middle of it, and it's still quite an interesting process. And I think management, or the idea of fisheries management, is still quite new for Bonaire as a whole. And from a WWF perspective, we're actually asking the question to ourselves, like, to what extent does the government truly want the fishery sector to be managed? Do they really want to pay any attention to the sector, or do they kind of want to continue to, neglect it might be a big word, but not pay too much attention to it and just let the fishermen do whatever they want, considering the sector isn't that big.
Okay, excellent. Anyone else? So this is open to everyone.
I'll follow up. I'm actually really interested in talking to you about your project more, Stacey. I feel like there's a lot of combination. I could almost repeat what she said verbatim and pretty much be right on. I do want to note that there is, in Dominica, there is a high level of trust in the fisheries division at in the government, but there's distrust in the political side of the government. And so this becomes somewhat problematic, because I think, Stacey, you were sort of alluding to this sort of like working with one fisher specifically, and then there's sort of a belief that fisher gets certain things based on the fact that there's a strong partnership. And when I was there was an election happening, and so there was an assumption, whether it was true or not, and I'm not saying it was, that the public fads were being directed at different communities based on their support for the people in power. So co-governance can seem to be successful at sort of like local spaces, and again, in partnerships between the fisheries division and the local communities, the different landing sites. But there was this sort of political overlay to the whole thing, which I find super fascinating and don't know how to delve into more. And then in my opinion, and I recognize Hazel's on here and she's done a lot of work in Dominica. So Hazel, maybe you can correct me if you have different perceptions on this, but the cooperatives were not particularly strong. And so the cooperatives were supposed to be the method of co-management, but it really became down to the fisheries division that was the co-management arm. So I guess to answer your question, the answer is both yes and no.
I would like to add just a little bit to that as well, Joy, because what I noticed, like you said, is initially everybody wanted to work with a cooperative, but as soon as that became too difficult, they tend to fall back on, working with singular fishermen. So I think it's very difficult for the local stakeholders, even though they appreciate the idea of co-management and they would like to see it executed in practice, to actually adhere to the principles of co-management. That is still very, very challenging on various levels. Yeah.
I'm just curious, how much is that between both of you? Like, is that a result of the type of fisheries involved or the history of the region? Does that have a role to play in terms of how they were organized before? I know Stacey mentioned also conflicts with immigration, right? Does that also exacerbate the situation?
Yeah, I think for sure. Like many and most all Caribbean islands, Bonaire has a colonial past, but I think a difference is that the Netherlands, which was the former colonizer of Bonaire, is still very much present, and it became even more present since 2010 in terms of governing the islands. And in general, there's a very strong sentiment that there is a very big dominance of the Netherlands on the island. So a lot of people, aside from the fishermen, also speak of a sense of recolonization of the island by the Netherlands. So that is always kind of creating this tension between governmental institutions and the population, so to say, on Bonaire. So I think that that sense of or lack of trust is really rooted in this history that is on the island, and but not only between the institutions, so between the government and the fishermen, but also between fishermen themselves. And I think the lack of trust between or among fishermen, I think that is maybe universal in the sense that fishermen tend to be kind of individualistic. They feel like the sea is an open place. I just go there just to be let alone, and nobody needs to tell me anything. That's the reason why I fish in the first place. So that, in combination with this, colonial history and these sentiments of recolonization, are not how do you say that in English? Encouraging for building this sense of trust, or it's not positive, so to say. So this sense of trust is very, very fragile, and you even notice that even though several projects might have gone great between those stakeholders, the tiniest thing can go wrong and it just falls apart again, and it feels as if you need to start from scratch. And I think, and then I notice in the discourse between those stakeholders that they tend to refer to, but you did this in the past and you did that in the past, and the old pain is really, really present still. And I think that is one of the things that makes it very complicated to establish a proper functioning form of co-management. Beside the fact that I think, like you mentioned, Joy, the cooperative itself is not a very strong organization. I mean, they really do represent the fishermen, but in terms of organizational strength, yeah, it's not the best yet.
And I was so busy listening to Stacey, I don't know if I remember the question, but I think it said you asked, history and fishery. Was that what made the challenges?
Yeah, the type of fishery. I mean, there's some concern about the mobile species might be less amenable to community-based management. I mean, there's all sorts of dissenting voices in the literature. So just curious as to what you may have found.
So it's sort of interesting. I didn't look into that particularly, but I will say that the history of fishing in Dominica probably has a lot to do with it too. So fisheries were often considered sort of bottom of the barrel employment, and were often more subsistence than other forms of employment until the introduction of FADs, right? And then they were able to catch these relatively high value species. Although for the US folks in the room will tell you to buy a pound of tuna that was caught that day would cost you about $3. So it wasn't super high value in our world. But I think that sort of changing the way that the fishermen thought about their fishery into this more professionalized space, it just takes time. And I appreciate Stacey's sort of acknowledgement of trust, because a lot of my work outside of this is in, to get into this co-management, co-governance spaces. Trust is actually the key aspect. And we think more in terms of in the rural we sense of organizational skills and that kind of thing. But without trust, none of this works.
Okay, super. All right. I'm sure we'll come back to this one way or the other, but the next question is from Miranda and it's from Emily. It says, it sounds as though the majority of stakeholder involvement in developing the governance question involved existing collectors. Please correct me if I'm mistaken. Is there any concern that others may desire to enter the fishery for example, other full-time fishers who may want to begin collecting bycatch, and whether they will comply with the regulations if they weren't involved in the process.
So I think it's, so firstly, to actually collect bycatch, a collector, a fisher in another industry, in another fishery, sorry, would need to buy a license. So depending on the availability of that, that would be the first. So there is kind of a barrier to entry. It's the limited entry program, right? So I think just in terms of whether somebody, a new collector who is collecting marine life species in their traps, if they were not complying with the regulations because they weren't part of that process, I think that because of the degree of social capital in that fishery, that it would be found out. I think there's I think there are deterrents to that kind of behavior. Not saying that it wouldn't be possible, but I think the cost of these licenses now has gone up so much that it would seem like not an ideal business prospect to jeopardize your license with that kind of behavior. But you are right that yes, the program was established with the existing collectors. And remember, this fishery is really different to the ones that that Joy and Stacey have been talking about, just in how old it is. And this is a live capture. This is the tropical ornamental fishery. So there was this really big boom in the 80s, so that led this group of collectors to actually go to the state and ask to be regulated, because the fishery wasn't regulated. So because of that action, I think there's just, that there are the collectors that are, everyone knows each other, and they're quite specialized. So it's not like everybody is going out and looking for the same species all the time, and they have a huge area to collect their species from, so that they tend not to even visit the same sites. And it's quite different to a food fishery, where you have the I think that mentality that is different, and the typical kind of race to fish that doesn't necessarily exist in the marine life fishery.
Okay, great. Thanks, Miranda. Looking to see if there are any other questions. Maybe they're slow coming in. So I'll ask one of Emily. Emily, you mentioned the push for marine genetic resources in the BBN. Sorry, we're going to use acronyms here, right? Just the treaty. Yeah, whole acronyms all the time. So for that global treaty that's supposed to address areas beyond national jurisdiction, there's this, you said there was a push from the global south, but given the past experience of the Law of the Sea Convention and how that led to a sort of fracturing of support from developed countries led by the US, might this not also lead to a sort of less than effective treaty if this keeps being pushed?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's certainly a possibility to consider. There are a lot of similarities that we can see between what is happening with marine genetic resources and what happened with the ISA and the minerals of the seabed. And in fact, some of the developing countries in the global south are really harkening back to that and saying, when this was all negotiated, we didn't know that there would be value in marine genetic resources. And so we should be thinking about that as well. And it does seem as though the US in particular and Russia as well are quite hesitant to really want to agree to any restrictions on access to MGRs. So it will be interesting. And there's also quite a bit of work in this area. Alice Vidreau has done quite a bit on particularly whether these will be subject to the common heritage of mankind. So we've kind of built on that with the spatial aspects of it, but it will be interesting to see what happens in the 4th round of negotiations. There has been, of course, a government change in the United States. So whether that will affect things remains to be seen. The next round is currently scheduled for March of next year. But I do think there is still, there seems to be quite a bit of possibility open for knowledge, sharing of knowledge and capacity building and technology transfer and things like that. So even the countries that seem kind of hesitant to agree to any sort of financial sharing of benefits do seem to be willing to agree to some sort of system for knowledge to be shared and some form of capacity building. But I will say that actors in the global south are really emphatic that that is not sufficient. And so this is something that I think we will see continue to be kind of a hot button issue in March. And I agree, there does seem to be the possibility of some kind of fractioning that happens amongst actors in this area, but I do think it's still really important to think about, because if we do nothing, it is still an affirmative choice. Right now, this is something that is happening. There are intellectual property rights that are being imposed on genetic resources from the high seas. And so it's, I think, really to keep in mind that the choice to do nothing is still a choice. So I think that is why this is going to continue to be an issue, because it is something that regardless of what is done in these negotiations, it will have, I think, implications for kind of this global distribution of wealth coming from these resources.
Okay, great. And just to follow up on that, with respect to the RF, the regional fishery management organizations, wouldn't it, you mentioned that they would, of course, be left aside in terms of managing their resources. Is there any talk, say, for instance, in CAMLA or ICAT, more of the forward-thinking RFMOs to consider adding MGRs to their portfolio?
So I don't know. We haven't focused on what's been happening there. We've really our work is only specifically on the BBNJ negotiations, but it would be interesting to see whether this will expand to any other organizations. And I would note that there is some discussion of working with other organizations for the treaty as a whole, particularly things like area-based management tools. There is recognition that if there are things like MPAs that are enacted, that will have to be done in conjunction with RFMOs. So that's a really good question, and I don't know the answer as to whether any of them have considered any kind of management surrounding MGRs.
Okay, great. Thanks, Emily. Are there any questions from within the panel? I know a couple of you wrote questions down, but you certainly have the power of the mic and can ask questions too. I don't know if anyone has any other questions. It's all quiet there. Okay, I'll ask one last question because I was very interested in this. So working in the field myself, I find that there is an unevenness with local ecological knowledge, especially in terms of whether it's available, whether participants are willing to provide that. So how did each of you, especially if those of you involved with LEC, with local ecological knowledge, and that goes into co-management as well, working with the marine life collectors, certainly with what Carissa mentioned, directly. How did you maximize that? How did you try to gain the trust of these participants? Because I don't get the best luck all the time, so it'd be great to get some tips.
Yeah, I guess I can jump in on that. So I've been really fortunate. I work with Dr. Jennifer Rehage at FIU, and over the years, she's been a professor. She's worked really hard to develop these relationships with fishing guides in South Florida. In the Florida Keys, especially, recreational fishing guide industry is huge. It's a really big part of the economy, and a lot of the guides tend to be very conservation-oriented people. They rely on healthy fish stocks to attract their clients, to maintain clients. So they're kind of an ideal partner to begin with. And so a lot of them tend to be very open to helping with the science, especially when they see that their concerns are being addressed. So for like my project specifically, the concerns about crevalle jack populations came directly from the fishing guide communities. They've been observing a dramatic decline in catch rates, and they were really concerned. So the fact that they're seeing their concerns kind of being addressed and pushed forward towards management, I think really helps maintain those relationships. So it's kind of been an ongoing thing over the years that my advisor has worked really hard to maintain. And so I think that's just a really important part of it, and getting additional like interviews it kind of came from the people that we know. So there's, the partners that we have worked with for a long time. And when other fishing guides hear from, those people, hey, you should talk to these scientists. They're really cool. They want to know about what you're seeing on the water. I think that really helps kind of give us an in to talk with those people. So it's worked really well for us.
Yeah, what worked for me is really working closely with them, and also offering just help and assistance, even with things that might not be of direct relevance to you. Just showing that their concerns are also something that I can find important or help out with. And then it remains key that you kind of balance the relationship, so that it doesn't become a relationship where you're only helping them and they are not helping you anymore. So that sometimes is still a bit of a challenge. But I feel like showing your willingness to also address the challenges that you're running up against really build that sense of mutual trust in my case. So yeah, and a lot of communication, being super transparent about what we're doing all the time.
I would second that transparency. And I found this is sort of the benefit of being able to take a sabbatical and do your PhD work while you're actually working a full-time job, is take the time. I took probably about 4 months of just visiting before I even asked questions. So I really took the participatory, or the not participatory research approach, where you just sort of participant observation approach for a while, and asked if I could go fishing with them, and it was fabulous. This is, most of us get into this work because we're fascinated with the ocean, so you get to do that. Purchase their products, ate food with them, all that, played dominoes with them, which luckily I had done previous work in the Bahamas, so I had some pretty good skills built up from dominoes. And even though I had my instrument ready to go from the moment I landed in Dominica, I did not immediately go in and start peppering them with questions. And the interesting thing is I am now a lifetime member of all of the, even though I told you that the fishing cooperatives don't work very well, I'm still a lifetime member of all of the community fishing cooperatives. And go back and visit quite frequently, actually. So I feel like in addition to having study subjects, they made friends. Dominica, if you have the opportunity to go there, is a uniquely welcoming country. So if you walk into a random snackette, it's highly likely that someone will purchase something for you, purchase you a beer, a shot of rum, maybe hand you some food that they grew in their garden, and then argue about US politics with you. So I think, having done this work in a lot of places, Dominica was very unique in making it easier to do than other places. But all of that is a factor of having time. And we often don't have enough time to do this kind of work.
I'll just jump in there as well and say, it's every location matters. And, Joy has just been talking about a very unique experience. And I think that, in my case, and I should have mentioned this at the beginning, that I worked with our moderator, Manoj, on this research. But we were, we were lucky that the participants in our survey were very forthcoming in providing information, because of the end goal, which is to tell this success story. I mean, it sounds kind of too good to be true. But I think there were a very small number of cases where some collectors wanted a discussion before they participated in the interview. They really wanted to understand what our goal was, like whether they I think there was some concern that we would be working towards increased regulations, and that was something that I definitely had to clear up a couple of times. But yeah, definitely location matters, and understanding the nuances of local culture and the corresponding fishery, I think, is key.
Okay, great. We're just going to move along because we have a few questions. I think these all relate to Carissa, so I'll just spill these out. One of them is that your approach, your translational ecology approach, seems to have worked well in the context of recreational species and a well-developed guide-based fishery. How do you think it would translate into a food-based fishery, one with mixed recreational food fishing, whether it's commercial or subsistence? And then along those lines, you have, do you focus on all recreational fisheries, or do you talk mostly about anglers versus spearfishers? And if that's not enough, can you please mention 3 key conclusions?
Okay, I'll try to make this brief. Okay, so first question, yes, this translational ecology approach has worked very well with the recreational fishery with these fishing guide collaborators, but I do think it could be applied to other situations. I think, again, it's a lot about forming these connections with the stakeholders and addressing their needs through, again, it's a very much a bottom-up approach. So it's not so much that we, are coming to the anglers for help with a specific question that we already have. It's more coming to the stakeholders and asking them, what are their concerns? They're on the water every day. They interact with this fishery every day. What are they observing? And then kind of using that to guide research and subsequent management. So I think taking that approach and sort of considering yourself as a fishery scientist as sort of a liaison between the stakeholders and the managers, I think kind of helps to form those relationships and make that kind of research work. So then, yes, I do focus my Crevalle research for my dissertation is all recreational. There is a small commercial fishery for Crevalle jack, but it's more of an incidental fishery than anything else. So it's a predominantly catch and release. It's a hook and line fishery. So that's the main focus for my species in particular. And then I guess conclusions of my work, I think for one, addressing a stakeholder concern through this kind of translational ecology framework to take the concern and bring it to the end goal of management is kind of one major conclusion. Secondly, we've taken this data poor fishery, this species that no one's really paid attention to, we don't really know much about, and we've rapidly been able to learn things about their population dynamics and ecology from using these the local ecological knowledge. So that LEK research really helps us to learn a lot about species that we wouldn't otherwise know. And then I guess finally, just this framework that we have, I think can be applied pretty easily to other species and other areas. Again, like I mentioned before, kind of considering the fishery scientist as that sort of liaison, trying to take stakeholder concerns and bring them through a research process to some sort of management conclusion. So I think I addressed everything, hopefully.
Yes, you did. Thank you. Okay, so we'll finish with this. We have a statement and then a sort of parting question, which I think is quite appropriate. The statement by Pethrolina Isaac is that this is not a question, but coming from a small island where a governance model is still being formed, hearing these issues and areas of focus highlight the amount of work that needs to be done to improve the management capacity of my fishery sector. So yes, very much so, agree with that. And then ends up asking to any panelists, what would you say is a pathway to take to inspire local communities to understand the need to understand or participate, I guess, in the science behind their practice? And I think this is looking for generate local marine specialized knowledge, for instance. I mean, maybe this gets to a little bit of how to work with communities, but if any of you can answer that or address it, that would be great. And that will get us right out of time.
I can quickly say two things. The first thing to do is listen and trust the communities that you work with, and listen and trust their local ecological knowledge. I think Carissa put that really well. But the second, if it's possible, is co-generation of knowledge, which is super cool, right? So sort of developing local hypotheses, having them, do the research, do some analysis, and having them sort of generate their knowledge and generate the questions. I've done that successfully with a few different groups other than in Dominica, and the results are astounding. So those are the two things I might say. Neither is a panacea, neither is going to be the end all, but both of those might help a little bit.
Yeah, what I also really liked was to convince, sorry, Anna, to chat with certain fishermen and kind of have them express this message of knowledge is power. Information is what we need to make valid decisions. So in one of the latest member meetings of the Fisheries Cooperative, there were actually several fishermen that were speaking to each other and saying, if we can produce this knowledge and we can produce this information, then we can create a more sustainable fisheries that is, viable for our future generations. And that was really key to me, that they were expressing that message instead of me. So it was really only convincing, explaining it to several, but them drawing their own conclusions and then expressing that message. So that is some tip that I could give in terms of, generating that message to the broader fisheries community.
Okay, great. So we'll let Anna have the last word, and thank you, everyone.
Well, just to piggyback off of Stacy, those are some key points that I was going to highlight as well. And kind of going off of what the actors told me and also drawing from my own experience, it's kind of like that, creating those links in between people's personal experience and then with the projects that I worked on, their revenue, and also how that pertains to the future. So kind of creating those three themes into one kind of cohesive linear idea for people to kind of understand that there are connective links, and that science and kind of what they work with every day are not completely separate, really does help kind of convey these ideas in a kind of clear manner for everyone to understand.
Okay, super. Thank you. This was enlightening, interesting, and overall enjoyable. I hope everyone else enjoyed it as well, but please stay on board. We have the small scale fisheries in the wider Caribbean region session coming up next, and I'm sure there are lots of connections from what we just spoke about now. But thank you to the panelists, and great job. Thank you.
Thank you, Manoj. That was excellent timing on your part. And thank you again to all of our panelists today. This was really a very interesting and exciting start to the panel discussions of GCFI74. And to all of the attendees that are viewing today, pre-recordings of their full presentations, there are 10-minute presentations available for each of these presenters. So all you'll need to do is go back 1 week to Monday, 1st November, and you will see that there's everything will be there under governance presentations. So if you saw something today that you're very interested in, please go back and view all of these presentations, and you can also follow up directly with any of the presenters here today. So feel free, even though the session has technically ended right now, the conversations and the discussions can still keep going. So please, I encourage you to engage with all the presenters today via the app, and please go look at their presentations if you haven't already. So thank you again to Manoj and all the panelists for the governance section. And now we're going to move on to the small scale fisheries section. And our moderator for this event is Eric Wade from FAO. Eric, over to you.
Thank you very much, Fadila, for that welcome. And I think we had an excellent lead into our session. So great organization by GCFI in having our small scale fisheries section follow the governance section. I think there was a lot of overlap, and I'm excited to talk to our panelists today. So I think it's gonna be an excellent discussion. As Fadila said, my name is Eric Wade. For the purposes of this for the purpose of me moderating this session, I am currently a fisheries management expert consultant with the FAO office in Barbados. And I completed my PhD at Oregon State University and did research in Belize, Jamaica, St. Lucia, and Panama. So I'm excited to talk to our panelists. I think we have a wide breadth of different factors, of different aspects of small scale fisheries. And I think this demonstrates the diversity of small-scale fisheries in the Gulf and Caribbean region. So we are going to get started right now. I think we're going to have a lively discussion. So our first presentation up is Dr. Hazel Oxenford. And Hazel is well known to the GCFI family, having first presented as a UA PhD student in 1984, and subsequently has attended and presented with her students and colleagues at every meeting since. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Oxenford for her presentation on moored fish attracting devices in Dominica. Have they achieved their intended objectives? Dr. Oxenford, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Eric, and good day, good night to all of the GCFI family across the globe. It's my pleasure today to be presenting on behalf of my Dominican student, Jolan Defoe, who did his MSc here at CERMES in the academic year 2019-2020, so he was caught in the pandemic here. And this presentation is part of his MSc research. So Julian has over 20 years of experience in the fisheries department and has been intimately involved in the introduction and management of the moored fad fishery in Dominica. And the reason he's not here today is because he's now the Chief Fishery Officer in a new ministry, the Blue Economy Ministry in Dominica, and he just does not have the time. So this topic follows quite nicely from the overview we had this morning from Joy Hazel on the FAD governance experience in Dominica. So Jolan's research looked into whether the moored FAD fishery has achieved its primary objectives by looking in detail at the fishery catch and effort data from 9 key landing sites around the island over a 20-year time span, and from 1994 to 2014. And this covers the period of the development of the FAD fishery, which really began in earnest in 1998 with the large introduction of private FADs. So the first key objective of the introduction of this fishery was to increase overall fishery production. And yes, the FAD fishery certainly has done this. There's been a significant increase in landings. They've essentially doubled from around 120 metric tons a year in the 1990s to about 300 metric tons a year by 2014. The second objective was to reduce the fishing pressure on reef-associated species, and we found no evidence that this has in fact occurred. So the catch in the demersal fishery, or the reef-associated fishery, has remained approximately the same over this time period of between 40 and 50 metric tons a year. And there has not been much change in the demersal fishing effort. So that's my summary. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Dr. Oxenford. That was a very efficient summary of an excellent presentation. And next, we will move on to our next presenter, our next presenter is Ivy Barome, who is a technical coordinator at Mar Alliance and a postgraduate student at the University of Exeter. Ivy will talk to us about the abundance and distribution of deep water fishes in Mesoamerica. Ivy, over to you, please.
Hi, can you hear me and see me well? Okay, great, thanks. Okay, thank you for that introduction, and I will be talking about the distribution and abundance of deep water fishes in the Mesoamerican region, and specifically the countries of Belize and Honduras. This project is part of a larger project to describe the fishery in the region and determine the vulnerability of the species that are targeted and landed as bycatch. The deep water fish species tend to have conservative life history strategies such as slow growth and late maturity, which makes them especially vulnerable to overexploitation. And we know of dozens of examples around the world of deep water fishes becoming overfished and even extirpated in some areas before the biological studies and management can catch up to the threats. So building on previous work, the main goal of this project is to describe the abundance and distribution of deep water fishes in the Mesoamerican region. The secondary aim of the research is to compare how the abundance and distribution of the commercially important species differ in regions with relatively low versus relatively high fishing effort. And in this case, we can use the countries of Belize and Honduras as case studies, as we have seen pretty clearly that Belize's deep water fishery is relatively small and young, while the fishery in Honduras, and especially around the Bay Islands, is well established and has many more fishers participating in the fishery. So we used fishery independent vertical longline surveys along with a camera survey to evaluate the abundance and distribution of deep water fishes in both countries. And then we also supplemented these data to a certain extent with fishery dependent surveys. You can see on my slide the locations of capture through October of this year. And what we found is that there was, unsurprisingly, a species-specific depth distribution for the snapper species, and that for the deeper dwelling species, such as queen snappers and the cardinal or winchman snappers, there was a relationship between the size and the depth, with fish being overall larger in the deeper waters. The shallower species had a narrower depth distribution. This includes the silk and blackfin snappers, and we did not observe the same trend as the length did not increase with increasing depth. The groupers are more patchily distributed. Those are the ones in the squares, whereas the snappers are in triangles, and they have a depth and bottom type preference by species. Though there are a few holdout locations, it appears that the groupers have decreased in abundance overall in Honduras. The abundance of snappers overall is about 3.5 times higher in Belize than in Honduras, and the groupers were about 2.5 times more abundant in Belize. This is based on our fishery independent results. We also found that all species were on average larger in Belize than in Honduras. And as I mentioned before, the fishery in Belize is smaller and younger, so the fishing effort is much smaller across the country. And this is partly because the gear is much more expensive and more difficult to obtain in Belize. However, this is changing really quickly, and we're seeing a pretty big surge in the fishery, especially among the recreational sector. So the main takeaway from this research is that the distribution of those deep water snappers and groupers is driven by depth and bottom habitat. The nearshore fishery in Honduras, especially around the Bay Islands, is likely overfished, and we saw that the abundance of the deep water snappers is much higher in Belize, and that the fish are overall smaller in Honduras than they are in Belize. Groupers may also be extirpated in the more heavily fished areas of Honduras, but there are some areas that may be naturally protected due to the ocean and current conditions. It's important for us to identify the critical areas for conservation in this fishery, as the available habitat for these species is quite narrow, and the species will likely be slow to recover from overfishing. Our next steps are to assess the genetic structure and the genetic distribution of the populations, as well as a life history and the ecology of the species. And we have a goal of conducting an ecological risk assessment for the fishery and individual species where we have the data by 2025. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Ivy. The deep water fisheries industry in the region is emerging. So yeah, so this is an extremely timely research, and I'm looking forward to seeing what develops and what comes from it. So thank you very much.
Me too, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ivy. Our next presenter, as we get our slides going. Our next presenter is Jeff George, who is currently pursuing a master's degree at the National Taiwan Ocean University. He's also the founder and CEO of there's a name here in French, and French is not my original language. So I will not be saying that, and I will let Jeff say what the organization that he founded. But he's also an active member of the Haitian Youth Biodiversity Network. Today, he will be talking to us about overfishing of sea cucumbers and parrotfish, a major social ecological threat in Caracal Bay in the Three Bays National Park.
Hey, hello, everyone. Thank you so much. As you say, my name is Jeff George, and I'm from Haiti. This is a really good opportunity to me to be with you in this conference. This is my first time. I'm so really excited. And as you say, I'm a former student in bachelor degree the campus anchor of State University in Haiti. And also I was internship, I make some internship with Czech, specifically Dr. Gregor Olson and the Nature Conservancy consultant, Caroline Besada. Since this moment, my passion for marine biodiversity, specifically for reef conservation, just started. And this is the reason why I just started the first study in Caracal Bay, generally in Haiti, about overfishing of sea cucumbers and parrotfish. According to the result, I don't know if I can share my one slideshow. Hello?
You can share it now.
Yeah, I think you should be able to.
Okay, let me see. Because I don't know exactly. Okay, yeah, share screen, exactly. Okay. It's okay?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And as I say, my just okay, the main purpose of my research or my research problem is what are the socio-ecological effect of overfishing of parrotfish and sea cucumbers in Caracal Bay. Because during my research in 2018, I just realized the species are really overfished in Caracal Bay because the fishermen specifically use small gear like this, as you can see on the slide, because the fishermen have some problem. I just realized the socioeconomic vulnerability is the main problematic of overfishing in Caracal Bay specifically. In this case, according to the data that we have collected on Caracal Bay, we just realized parrotfish and sea cucumbers are really overfished. We just realized also immature species like parrotfish and cucumber sea have some average length like 10 centimeters, something like this, and 40 centimeters. In this case, we think it could be really important to focus on research specifically on marine conservation, specifically for reef fish in the Caracal Bay. We think also co-management of fisheries could be very interesting then, because at Caracal Bay, the fishermen or the stakeholders don't really know the importance of those marine species. I think it could be a really good opportunity to develop co-management, and we also we can also make we can also focus specifically on research, because actually we don't have a lot of scientists in Haiti. We just focus on marine biology. I don't know why, but we don't have a lot of scientists, because in this case, we don't have also a lot of information about fish specifically. This is the reason why I'm just really focused actually on my research. And I supposed to say also, it could be a really good opportunity for you like scientists in the United States to share your knowledge with local communities in Haiti, because when you have some stability, this is a really good opportunity for me to be with you. I was supposed to say also, I just started to learn English last year. Sorry, sometimes I just make some mistake, no problem, but I'm just really open to question, or if you have some comments, no problem. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jeff. Your English was excellent, so no worries on that. And thank you for a great presentation. Again, on an emerging fishing industry in the Caribbean. And I think we have some excellent opportunities for discussion here.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Our next presenter is Jesus Rivera Hernandez, who is currently a graduate assistant at the University of South Carolina. This morning, Jesus will talk to us about building capacity for sustainable fisheries management in the U.S. Caribbean, Queen Triggerfish age, growth, and maturity. Jesus, over to you.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, like you say, my name is Jesus Rivera Hernandez. I am a student from the University of South Carolina. I've been working in life history parameter for reef fish since 2011. And this work is about the importance of queen triggerfish in the U.S. Caribbean that is composed from the islands of Puerto Rico, St. Thomas, St. John, and St. Croix. And despite the importance of this reef fish and the reef fish species for the fisheries, there is no information about the life history of the species. So that is make almost impossible to do an assessment for the species and create management to protect that species. So basically, we are just working since 2013 when I met Dr. Sherbet. She gave me the opportunity to work in this, I would call a journey. We are been working on queen triggerfish since then, and then other rich fish species like parrotfish. So we basically want to know how we can just age and grow queen triggerfish, and then also the maturity of the species. So already we have been working with the maturity so far for 2 of the islands, for Puerto Rico and St. Croix. But after that, we need to, like I mentioned, we have to say age, because age is an important thing for doing a stock assessment. You need to know how old is the fish and at what age the fish reach maturity, and all the growth parameters and all the other information that the age and growth gonna give you, do management. So our big problem was that the previous information on triggerfish used as a aging structure the dorsal spine. Dorsal spine are really hard to read, and basically the analyze that form doesn't make any sense if you compare with the size of the fish. So we have to first check a way that we can just can age the fish properly, and we did it. Our lab developed methods to age queen triggerfish otoliths, and we also do the validation for that, and the result was impressive. The only study previous in the U.S. Caribbean that was with samples from Puerto Rico and St. Thomas. The age that was reported as the maximum age was 7 years. And now with our new methods of age validation and the methods for count to use the otoliths of the structure to aging, we just get 23 years old fish, a maximum age for the Caribbean. And also we get some sample from the East Coast of the United States, more specific from the North Carolina, South Carolina region. And we get also age estimate with otoliths for 40 years. So we have been triplicate in the Caribbean, the age estimate, the maximum age estimate. And that gives you a new perspective about the species. And overall, these fish are doing pretty well. And the other thing that is important, even though the islands are pretty close, all 3 islands, well, 4 islands, St. Thomas and St. John are combined, have different gear selectivity, or excuse me, they have different gear preference, and that also make pretty different range of where they catch the fish. St. Thomas like trap fishing and deeper waters. Puerto Rico and St. Croix do spear fishing on shallower water, and also Puerto Rico have traps. Puerto Rico have a combination. So it's a really interesting way to. It's a really interesting how these, even the close island, they are close. There are a difference in how they catch their triggerfish. So overall, I just want to say that, yeah, this is important because we know more about the life history of this species, and we are continue working in other species in the region.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jesus, for your great research in expanding our scope of inference and our scope of understanding of queen triggerfish in the U.S. Caribbean. Our next presenter, last presenter for this session Spetulina Isaac, who is president of Barbudan Go, a young grassroots NGO operating in Barbuda that aims to give community opportunity in 5 key areas: culture, history, alternative education, environmental preservation, and disaster mitigation. Today, Petrolina will talk to us about fisheries regulation to protect the parrotfish species and healthy oceans. Petrolina, over to you.
Thank you very much, Eric, and I hope you can hear me clearly. Just let me know. Perfectly. Now, good morning to all, Barbudan Go. First of all, we want to thank GCFI for extending to us this platform so we can share our commitment to develop better ocean management within our fishing sector here in Barbuda, which is a very small island, a part of the nation state of Antigua and Barbuda, and our drive to develop ocean stewardship within our community. Now, Barbuda, we primarily export lobster, conch, and fish. And the island is practically surrounded by reefs. In some locations, especially like in the northeastern side of the island, we have barrier reefs. And then as we go around the coast, we have different reef types. Now, Barbudan Go, we clearly understand that there is a connection between healthy reefs, healthy oceans, and our practices. And that's one of the real reasons why we are pushing to promote our fisheries regulations where the prohibition on parrotfish harvesting is concerned. In Barbuda, it is banned all year round, while in Antigua, there's a seasonal ban. And ideally, you know, we would like to see Barbuda fisheries sector grow to a point where there's like more whole-scale management that would definitely support our marine ecosystem to include not only closed seasons and prohibitions, but reduction of pollutants in our water and coral restoration. And, you know, that's our big dream. And we are really and truly working on getting individuals on board so that they can support our efforts. But in the meantime, what we are doing as our first step to healthy oceans and healthier reefs is to raise the awareness within our community and really making our community conscious about the connection between an unhealthy reef and the bounty that our sea would have available to it. And one way or one approach to start developing a more healthy reef, more healthy reef is to make sure that we keep our parrotfish in our oceans. There's been a study conducted by Deborah Brosnan and Associates in 2021, this year, and that study was very, very informative, and it further intensified our focus on this particular regulation. They did a survey of a series of patch reefs around the island, and they found that most of our patch reefs, they are dominated by macroalgae. And of course, this is one indicator of poor reef health. And this seemed to be typical of the reefs around the island. Although there are a few patches of very good reef structures. Of course, what we want our reefs to be dominated by a combination of corals and gorganians and sponges. And the only way we can get there is to make sure that our community understands the science, again, behind of our fisheries regulations, and our community is better ready to engage in habits that will contribute to sustainable practices. Our hope is that if we can shift the power, to move it from the power of the supplier to the power of the buyer, then if our buyers are not in desire of the parrotfish, then our suppliers would reduce that command. And this would help to support and give more weight to the fisheries regulations and implementations and the compliance to those regulations. To raise the consciousness of our community, Barbudan Go, we launched a multimedia campaign, and we really turned to our local artists to actually push this campaign. So we brought our dramatists, our activists, our artists, and we got them all involved. And as a result, there was a series of radio and animation ads. There were radio launch campaigns that really focused on the ecological side of the 12-month ban. And we even hosted the very first celebration of World Ocean Day in Barbuda. And this is where we had a series of preservation art on display. We actually have one in the background that's kind of one of my favorites. It's actually called The Death of the Ocean. And if you look at it, you have the healthy parrotfish at the bottom and the skeleton ones, and then you can see what's happening with the corals at the within our reef system. So the fact that we were able to transfer the knowledge to our locals and then they created products for our community engage in, that shows us that a shift is happening that we are very interested in keep supporting. When you talk to local fishers in Barbuda, our fishers will say things like, we're listening to the prohibition bans and all we want is to just take 1 and 2 out of our sea. And it's very hard for you to penalize us when the neighboring islands, they're coming and they're harvesting by the boatloads. And there is fact to that statement from our local fishers. We do need to figure out how to increase the capacity of our local fisheries sector to patrol our waters. But while we are waiting on the finance and the training that's needed to make those programs more effective, we need to make sure that locally within our consumers and suppliers that we are complying to our regulations, or else, the fate of our ocean, it's going to wait on us. So understanding, that environmental degradation is definitely an oncoming outcome. We are really going to continue to push to have a shift in our mindset, in our community's consciousness, a shift in our practices so that we have more sustainable approaches, so that the parrotfish harvesting will be practically non-existent within our waters, and we have better rejuvenation and restoration of our reefs, and eventually an achievement of healthy oceans. Barbuda Go would like to take this quick moment, I know I'm out of time, to thank Waite Institute, who financially supported and also provided knowledge for us to run these initiatives and campaigns throughout our community. Rulio Camacho, who is a local marine biologist who has been working along in the Deborah Brosnan Associates team, sharing the knowledge and data that they've been collected on their ongoing research. And of course, thanking the community of Barbuda and the local fisheries officers to aid us in activating our community to become activists for fisheries regulations. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Petrolina. And I think, so that brings us to the end of our presenters' summary recap of their presentation. As Fadila said at the start, you can watch the full version of those online on the Hoover app. And I think something that was really interesting from this session is the diversity of different aspects of small-scale fisheries, from the social component to the ecological. And then Petrolina did an excellent job of talking about the importance of community outreach and raising awareness to ensure that we are promoting sustainable fisheries management and including both the social and the ecological component. As we get started on our panel discussion, I encourage our audience to submit questions using the Q&A submission button or using the chat button as well. And I will get started with a question from Nancy Brown-Peterson for Jesus. Jesus, Nancy asked, do you have any maturity estimates for queen triggerfish? And what methods are you using to estimate maturity? And last part of that question, are there any inter-island differences you have noticed?
Yeah, we use now the maturity, if it is mature or immature, we use Nancy Brown-Peterson 2011. Also, we modified it in Kelly Stormer, that was in 2017 for gray triggerfish. And yeah, we in the presentation we calculate the L50 for the fish. We don't see any difference so far. The problem is that, like I say, for St. Thomas, they catch fish on deeper side. So I only have a few representation of immature fish from St. Thomas. So, yeah. I didn't see so far any difference on material inter-island differences.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jesus. Ivy, our next question is for you from Mark Peterson. Mark asks, how are the two collection approaches compare, and how are you standardizing your data sets?
I'm guessing this is between the fishery dependent and fishery independent, is what he's referring to. Yes. So as I mentioned, the fishery dependent information is largely to supplement our surveys, our fishery independent surveys. So the direct comparisons that we'll be doing as we're sort of comparing as we go along, but the final analyses will be apples to apples. So any of the actual linear models or statistical models that are directly comparing the lengths or the sizes or the species distribution will be based on fishery independent data. We're mostly doing the fishery dependent data to collect more life history information, where we're not getting that because a lot of the way that our fishing method is slightly different than the actual fishers in the fishery. A lot of them can go a little bit shallower. Their soak time is less. And so because of that, I'm not necessarily getting some of the smaller fish in the fishery independent survey. So I am lumping it to a certain extent just to increase the sample sizes and some of the length distributions, but certainly going to take that into account when we're actually doing our comparisons statistically. So the fishery independent survey is identical across countries and across regions. We use the same hooks, the same methods, and the same bait whenever we can. And the fishery dependent data, we record the depth of capture, the number of hooks, the hook size, and the same information.
Excellent. Great. Yeah, I think that answers Mark's question very well. And Joanna is applauding you for excellent background.
The queen snapper, beautiful fish.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ivy. Our next question, I'll go to Jeff, and then I'll go to Hazel. Jeff, Michelle has a question for you. Michelle wants to know, what methods are you using to evaluate the socio part of your socio-ecological assessment?
I use mixed methodology, or the socio-ecology part. I just use qualitative methodology. During this process, I just lead some interviews to the fishermen, and I also lead some focus group. During the situation, I asked the fishermen the situation of the parrotfish in the fisheries. I just lead the same, or I just realized the same thing also for the fisher cucumbers during Caracal Bay. And generally, their interest were generally the same. The fishermen say, at Caracal Bay, we just caught generally juvenile fish because we don't have a lot of opportunity. Or because during the research, I just realized also the vulnerability or the economic vulnerability of the fishermen. Generally, the people say, we don't have a lot of money, we don't have a lot of food. Generally, we're supposed to take the fish in the sea because we can do anything. This is the reason why generally overfishing in Haiti is a big problem due of the socioeconomic vulnerability of the fishermen. And as I say, I just use qualitative research like focus group interviews to have the information.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And Hazel, one of our panelists, Petrolina, has a question for you. Petrolina would like to know, you noted there was not a reduction in fishing around the reefs. What do you think are the top 2 factors that contribute to this?
This is a very interesting question, and it's certainly one that we need to get out in the field and really ask the fishermen. This research was done during COVID when Julian was not able to go out and question fishermen, although he's very, very intimate with the fishery anyhow. He suggested that reef fish are a very important part of the culture. And therefore, even though the price has been maintained and people expect fishermen to bring in reef fish, So part of it is culture. Part of it is perhaps that the inshore boats, we need to do a basic valuation, because the costs involved in the nearshore fishery, pulling traps maybe once or twice a week, is very much lower than the cost involved in going out to the offshore fads. The catch unit effort is certainly lower in the demersal fishery, but if the prices are being maintained, it's still worth doing. So I think it's very important to get to the bottom of what are the incentives that keep the reef fishery going. In many cases, it's the same boats that are doing the offshore fishery. And therefore, if the offshore fishery is more efficient now, they've got more time left for doing demersal fishing. So that's another consideration. Thank you for the question.
Excellent. And I think that leads to a very good transition to a question Alejandra asked for Petrolina and for Jeff. And so Petrolina, will start with you. In Barbuda, are parrot fisheries part of the traditional diet in Barbuda, or what you're seeing mainly the result of overfishing of other species?
Okay, so it is a part of our tradition. And we do know that we have to work on getting our community willing to change habit. And habit changes doesn't happen overnight. But it is also attributed to overfishing, and especially from boats from neighboring islands. And this is where our local fishers often challenge the prohibition ban, because they constantly say that we do not have the reach to police the vessels that are actually taking the parrotfish by the boatloads. And this is an area that we do know that we need to focus on, where fisheries management is concerned. And we are looking at how can we launch programs and attract the resources so that we can provide what is needed for our fisheries officers, so that our policing becomes more efficient.
Excellent. Jeff, how about you? What did you notice in Caracal Island? Are the parrotfish fisheries part of the traditional diet, or is what you're seeing just mainly the fact that the other species have been overfished and they're moving on to parrotfish now?
Okay, good question. I think all of the species at Caracal Bay is overfished. And the situation is really sad, I'm supposed to say that, because we just realized a lot of lack of mature species at Caracal Bay. I can precise specifically snappers, jack, okay, fish. All of the species are really overfished at Caracal Bay. And actually, sea cucumbers are just I suppose to precise maybe with some preservation. I can say something like this. In Caracal Bay, actually, we don't have a lot of sea cucumbers because the species are really, really overfished. And I suppose to say, actually in Caracal Bay, the local fishermen just use some illegal gear, something like this, because actually there are some people, some regularization in Haiti, because the government or the ministries of environment don't want to to give the fishermen the possibility to catch the birdfish, but due of the poverty of the fishermen, okay, we can do anything. The situation is really, really sad, actually.
Excellent. Thank you both. So Ivy, we are coming back to you. In terms of groupers, and so this is from Alfonso. In terms of groupers and snappers, were these sampled during the same seasons in both countries for comparisons? This latter is for your fishery independently.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Yes, the project began in Belize. So in the beginning of the project, I was mostly focusing on Belize. And then we sort of realized that, of course, the fishery is extensive throughout the Mesoamerican region. And we also knew that the fishing effort was likely to be much higher in Honduras. So the beginning of the question was sort of could we almost look into the future of the fishery in Belize by looking at its neighboring country where the fishing effort has been going on for a longer period of time. So we transitioned our sampling efforts into Honduras. And in the beginning, I would say no, but now I'm actually full-time in Honduras. And so I'm continuing that survey in Honduras now. So now, yes, we're getting overlap in the seasons. And one of the focuses for this year has really been to identify, especially when the reproductive season is for a lot of these species, and if they're spawning on a certain moon, if there are aggregations like we see in some of the shallower species. And so because of that, I am definitely focusing on getting a similar sampling for all seasons across. And so we're getting to have a fairly equal effort across those countries so that we will have equal sampling in all of the months. And we're not looking at something in February versus something in October and using that as our comparison rather than by country.
Excellent. Alfonso, I hope that answers your question. Jesus, our next question is for you. So one of our attendees said they're excited to read your work and how it will be applied to future stock assessment. But specifically, the question is, how do you hope to see your results advance our ability to assess queen triggerfish population moving forward? So loaded question.
Well, I mean, for 2013 stock assessment, the conclusion was that there is no life history information. So now we are providing that information. If the information is enough to do the stock assessment, that is not on me, that is in the people that do the stock assessment. But we are being providing information that they are required, like longevity and age growth, the age and the growth for estimate mortality. That is the way that you can do mortality, is with the age information. A part of that, this work was in collaboration with the fishermen and so agencies in the Caribbean. So we are hoping that it is not enough, will be a really good baseline for future project, and try to complete all the information that they probably need required for this species.
Excellent. Yes, yeah. So I think there's great peacelines work being produced from Jesus' work, which will contribute great to the management of queen triggerfish. Petrolina, Hazel asked a question about the market for parrotfish and where and who is your key market. Like we talked about the market, like you talked about, if someone is not buying the parrotfish fishery will decline. So where is the market?
Okay, so with the prohibition ban in Barbuda, we are not only finding the fishers, we also find individuals in the secondary industry. So if you are selling the fish, if your little fish business, your fish fry stall, whatever the case may be, is caught selling the parrotfish, you'll also be fined. So that is one way in which we have been really pushing the policy so that different levels of the industry within Barbuda is controlled. But as mentioned, a lot of the fishers of the harvesting of parrotfish, and I'm talking about harvesting by the hundreds and thousands on a weekly basis. These boats are coming from Dominica, they're coming from Guadeloupe, and they're coming from Antigua. And for instance, in Antigua, the parrotfish regulation is seasonal. What we would like to actually find out is, and this is where Jesus's work is so important. How do we start really and truly mapping our population to see what effect is really and truly happening? So our Antiguan fishers coming to the Barbudan waters because their seasonal, their close season has caused a reduction in their stock. Why they're now fishing in Barbuda, because we fish relatively much less than they do for this particular fish species. What's happening in Dominica, why they're coming to our waters, what's happening in Guadeloupe, why they're coming to our waters to harvest the parrotfish. So at the end of the day, the Barbudan economy doesn't even benefit from the harvesting.
Yeah, I think you're asking some excellent follow-up questions there, Petrolina, and oftentimes those are the million-dollar questions. What is driving folks increasing their fishing effort, and what's leading to that? So million-dollar question. Hopefully we can get the million-dollar funds to find out the answer. Our next question is for Hazel. Hazel, based on the presented results, do you think it's a good idea to promote FAD fisheries at the regional level?
I was dreading this question. It depends on the objective for introducing a FAD fishery. If your primary objective is to reduce reef fishing effort, then clearly our results show that in the Dominica case, it has not done that. And so you really need to understand what is driving the reef fishery or what is preventing fishermen from fishing offshore species in the first place. If the primary objective of the FAD fishery is to increase the efficiency of your fleet, then clearly moored FAD fishing does that, but it doesn't come without problems. So it does attract juveniles. It's very easy to take juvenile billfish and juvenile tuna from around the FADs, and so they need to be properly governed. And I could bounce this back perhaps to Joy, who presented this morning on governance arrangements about how you really do implement regulations around the FAD fishery. It's not easy. So I find that a difficult question to answer.
Yes, yeah, I agree with you. Yes, it's very difficult in terms of what our objectives are in the different areas, and context also matters in the deployment of FAD fishery. It's not a panacea. You can't apply it across. For Jeff, Ivy has a question for you on the exportation of sea cucumbers. Is it being exported out, or is it being consumed locally?
Question. I think this is a really good question. Curiously, in Haiti, we don't hit sea cucumbers, but only sea cucumbers are exported to Hong Kong via exporters at Port-au-Prince, the capital of Haiti, generally, but we don't hit sea cucumbers in Haiti.
And Jeff, we will stay with you
yes.
And this is a question from Michelle.
Okay.
Would it be possible to establish fish refuge or areas of no extraction in Haiti?
I think it's possible because generally the fishermen know their actions are generally bad. The problem is how you can just find a way to talk to the people locally, because generally the people want to have also another possibility to survive. I could say something like that, but it's possible because actually Akar Bay is a marine protected area actually, but we can just establish something like this. But the main problem or the main issues is how you can give another possibility to the local fishermen, because generally the people want to participate. The people know also the importance of co-management of fisheries at Caracol Bay. I think it could be a really good opportunity.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jeff. Petrolina, Alejandro has a follow-up question for you. In addition to enforcing parrotfish regulation and developing local programs, are there any transboundary programs being considered to approach the poaching problem?
Not at this point. We are just, the discussion has been raised. The fishers raised the discussion, the Fisheries Association have raised the issue, and we recently did a community assessment. The Red Cross actually spearheaded that, focusing on the fisheries industry and their problems. And so, this issue is being just voiced at every single platform. Our local chairman of Fisheries and Agriculture, he wants to develop a department within the fisheries sector, the fisheries management sector, that would be able to better police our waters. Presently, our fisheries division only has one vessel to police the entire waters surrounding Barbuda. Barbuda is 62 square miles, and that's something impossible to do with one vessel. As well as we have looked at the fact that our fisheries officers, they do not hold a license of arms. Many of our fisheries officers in Antigua, they do. So when they do go out and see, they have to work with the members of the local police force who don't really have authority on sea for implementing fines and so forth. They're just there to accommodate the whole procedure. So these are two areas that we have looked at: the need to increase our capacity by equipment, the need to train our fisheries officers so that they feel more confident implementing the policies, because even locally we find that our fishers, they would likely get warned too many times before a fine is actually implemented. We're a very small community, a community of less than 2,000 people. So you're finding your cousin, you're finding your uncle, more or less. But that is no excuse to the facts. Everyone is aware of the rules and regulations, and we should just understand the bigger picture of it. So our hope is within the next 2 years or so, we would be able to add at least 2 more boats to our department. We have recently facilitated, Wait Institute as well came on board to facilitate a training of our fisheries officers in Saba that really looked at the implementation of fisheries regulations and policing the waters. So once the capacity of our department grows, then we will see how best we deal with curtailing the activities.
Excellent. Thank you, Petrolina. Jesus, our next question is for you. So one of our attendees really liked the methods and approach you used in your recorded presentation for examining otoliths in your study. Could you talk to us a bit more about your methodological approach?
Yeah, I gotta try to explain it better. I'm really a bit nervous. English is not my first language neither, so I'm having a hard time here. So,
Jesus, you can speak in Spanish. We have interpretation available.
I will try to go with English. I know, I appreciate it. So basically the methods are described in one of our publications that we shared on the WOBA app that we did it with great triggerfish. But basically we have to design a way to extract the otoliths of queen triggerfish. If you see in the presentation, they are really, really small and really, really fragile. So we have this method that with a serrated knife, we just cut behind the bony part of the head and we expose the otoliths and then we remove it. So we can do 2 things. We can just go and embed it, or we can just do it a reading whole. You can do with other species in the Gulf that you can read the whole otolith instead of sectioning. Sectioning is kind of hard because the shape of the otoliths of the queen triggerfish are not that similar to any parrotfish or any other species like snappers. They are really hard to get a good section. So we have to read it whole. So when you have to do whole, we just put it in water and we just use I think it's I forgot. We use a light to put it there to see the alternation in opaque and translucent zones. And under the microscope, we can count that. And Dr. Sherbet was, since 2013 that I met her, she was going with this idea and how we just, and she was the one that came with the protocol of the how to age the otoliths. And I just learn it and be the second reader, and we just been established the difference of we just made the comparison of reading spines and otolith, and that work gonna come sooner for the age validation of the otolith for queen triggerfish and the comparison with the spine. And also before that, if you are really interested in see how to extract the otolith, Dr. Sherbet provide the pictorial guide how to extract otoliths in the Vanderco, in the Gulf, in the Manual of Aging, the Gulf and Atlantic species, the Vanderco one, the 3rd edition in the 2020. So hopefully that helps.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That was very good. Jesus, and I think very concise, but also effective overview. Ivy, our next question is for you from Nancy. Nancy says the smaller size of capture of several species in Honduras versus Belize is concerning. Are the smaller fish sexually mature? And how would you manage a deep water fishery to help solve this problem, given that once fish are removed from deep water, their survival upon release is very low?
Thank you. Yes, that's another really good question, and it is concerning, and that's one of the reasons why we're really focusing on some of these areas. So, are the smaller fish sexually mature in the near shore Bay Islands, especially like Roatan, where you can just go out in a dory and drop a line and get down to deep waters really quickly? The fish that I've sampled in those near shore fisheries are not mature. We're getting, blackfin snapper that are 15, 20 centimeters. The fish that are being caught on the offshore banks are mature, and we're seeing some spawning activity as well. So the fish that are further away from, as we expect, further away from the human populations, where you need a motorized boat and you need good conditions to get to, those fish we're seeing mature fish, we're seeing larger fish. Managing the fishery is an interesting question because especially in Honduras, the management is very difficult and there's not a lot of vigilance. Something that we're hoping that this 30 by 30 management strategy that we're seeing around the world, we're hoping that potentially some of the protected areas might be extended because the deep water fisheries are near shore. Just extending the margin of the protected area by a kilometer could encompass almost all of the deep water habitat that these fish are in. Where that's not available, what we're really trying to do is provide all of this information to the fishermen directly. So as we work with fishermen collecting this information, we go out and are collecting all of this information. We collect with the local traditional deep water fishers, and then we go back into the communities and we present the results. And then, so our hope is that we can find these areas that are very critical and say, if you want to be able to catch groupers in the future, if you want your kids to be able to catch groupers in the future, if you could just not fish here during these months when they're spawning, give them a break. And then that might help them to recover. So we're hoping for a little bit more of a grassroots, self-managed knowledge exchange in order to promote management without it being something that necessarily needs to be enforced, because we're seeing it in a lot of the areas that's not going to happen. And so we're getting as much information back into the stakeholders as we can, so that hopefully some of this will be, like I said, grassroots and sort of organic in its nature.
Thank you very much, Ivy, for that response. Jeff, our next question is for you. And so one of our, Adriana would like to know, how do fishermen participate in Haiti's work? So how do you engage with local fishermen in your work?
Okay, generally, the fishermen in Haiti participate with some local scientists and also some scientists, like American scientists from Nature Conservancy, USAID, and different projects of conservation specifically, and Caracal Bay and for Liberté and Cape Haitian, and also in the south of Haiti. During this project, the fishermen can learn a lot of things, I think, during the conference, because generally the scientists realize some information for the fishermen about fisheries conservation, specifically the nature, and also some sciences from we've checked. Generally, according to my experience, all around of the country, I can say the fishermen have a good participation during the project specifically. This is what I think.
Thank you very much for that very important question, Adriana. Ivy, I think.
Yeah.
And this is from Alfonso, and Alfonso notes that as far as he knows, there is not any management for deep water fisheries in any of those countries or in any country of the region, and as well some management are species specific. How do you expect to eliminate your work?
Oh, I lost the last part of that, and I can't actually see the. Oh wait, there's the question. I can read it there. to me for management purposes according to, okay. So we don't anticipate that we will be able to, well, we're disseminating the information, but we're not managers. And so all that we can do is provide the information as we can. So we have had meetings with the Belize Fishery Department as we're collecting this information, we make sure that it's going back into all stakeholders' hands. So not just the fishers, but also the managers and the co-managers. So we have, COVID, of course, has hampered this a little bit. I was in Belize recently to conduct some more research and to have some meetings with the co-managers and managers. And then there was a spike in cases in Belize. And so all of the in-person meetings were canceled. But we've been rescheduling as GCFI has done, we're adapting. And so we've had some virtual meetings with the Fisheries Department in Belize. I know we're hoping, we've been missing and hitting with TASA in Belize as well, and we're hoping to get with them. So the idea, again, is we're disseminating the information for management purposes in that we can provide recommendations, but again, it's going to be in the hands of the managers for what they want to do with this. And the same goes in Honduras. We have a planned, hopefully before the end of this year, presentations with the co-managers around the Bay Islands and the fishery, or it's not fisheries, it's forestry department, and other co-managers as we can and into the communities. As the information is becoming more relevant, we are likely, we're reaching out to the fishers in Guatemala and also in Mexico, and I anticipate that we would have similar conversations with co-managers and managers in Mexico as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ivy. Yeah, the management question is always tricky. Well, excellent. If anyone has any additional questions, please feel free to ask our panelists. But I have a question for panelists. And this is, as our session looks at threats and opportunities for small-scale fisheries, I'm wondering how you think the global pandemic influenced your work. In terms, a lot of our discussion was on fishing effort. So, for example, parrotfish fishing effort in Barbuda, and Hazel talked about the effect that it had as well in Dominica. So I'm wondering how do you think the global pandemic affected fishing effort, and what you think are some of those long-term effects that it will have both socially and ecologically for your case studies?
I'll go first. As if this is an open. So definitely for the deep water fisheries, there was a big, it was a short burst of decreased effort, and because of just complete lockdowns in the countries. But I think that it's probably back up to similar effort as it was before the lockdowns, before the pandemic began. As I think the pandemic, coupled with the 2 Category 4 hurricanes that hit the Central America, especially affected a lot of the Honduran fishers that we work with. This is the big question that that is going to face everybody. Everything is changing. The pandemic, coupled with climate change, and you can't predict the weather the way that you used to. You can't predict the tides the way that, or not tides you can predict, but the changes of the weather with the moon and all of those sorts of things are all differing. And the people who believe most, know the most that the direct effects of climate change are local fishers. So coupled with the pandemic, I think these are the big questions that we really need to be asking about, is how do we move forward with resiliency in these fisheries? So I don't have an answer for that, but that's one of the big questions that's looming large. Because we know even in the deep waters, the climate change is also changing the temperatures at deep sea. And so is this going to affect the distribution and abundance? So with COVID, I think that those questions come up to the forefront as well, because it's having a similar, not exactly the same effect, but it's another big change, and it's unpredictable, and it's something that future generations are definitely going to be dealing with.
Thank you very much, Ivy. Hazel.
Yes, I would just like to add to Ivy, where in the Dominica case, they are still reeling from the devastating effects of hurricanes in 2017. and onwards. And it's really hard to separate because the fishery was the fishery facilities were so badly destroyed that they're still under recovery, and the fisheries division is under-resourced, and the fishery co-ops are under-resourced, and the pandemic was just one more problem, but probably not the major one. So it's about resilience, it's about building back better, well, facing more hurricanes most likely.
If I can also add to the discussion on this particular question, our fishers actually made a very vocal commentary about the effects of the pandemic and their immediate earnings. The pandemic did greatly, one of the major areas that our fishers earn monies from is from our lobster exports. And there was a significant decline in lobster exports during the lockdowns. And their question to the fisheries department was, apparently there is a market for parrotfish. And when you look at what has happened to our profit margins, not allowing us to capitalize on this additional income source is has not been thought through clearly. They're thinking that there must be times when we should relax the regulation based on what is happening within the broader spectrum of the world, such as pandemics that you have no control over. And it is disheartening to hear those very important questions and concerns and still stand and say no. Because we understand that we have to keep sustainability at the core of our focus, and especially in light of climate change. All of our fishers in Barbuda will say, we did a survey with them last year, and they all said, yes, they believe that climate change does affect the fisheries sector, but they didn't quite understand why. And this is why to and our community. And there's actually a presenter that did an excellent piece on the vulnerability of species. I'm not remembering her name, but she did some excellent work, and she's presenting this year at GCFI. It will be great to funnel that information in so that people understand the need to shift and adapt. So these are bigger questions, and management needs to figure out how to better support fishers to look at diversifying their income and being able to buffer the changes that's happening in an already fragile economy.
Thank you very much, Petrolina. Jesus, I have a question for you. As Petrolina touched on vulnerability, I think it's a very important link to your work on queen triggerfish. And it looks at, and I'm curious on the vulnerability of queen triggerfish to climate change, and what aspect of global climate change do you think queen triggerfish are most vulnerable to? I'll leave it at that.
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
What aspect of climate change do you think queenfish populations are most vulnerable to? So is it sea level rise? Is it change in habitat? What aspect of the population? What part of climate change is queen triggerfish more vulnerable to?
Well, I mean, queen triggerfish is being a really harsh species. You know, you can get it in too much. In shallow waters, in deeper waters, you will have to, probably the thing that will climate change will be affect queen triggerfishes in their diet. I mean, most of the previous triggerfish works that describe the diet say that sea urchin is one of the favorite prey, and in 2005 Puerto Rico have a really mass death of sea urchins. So for the species, overall, like only focusing on queen triggerfish with climate change, I don't see, it's a really hard species. That's really hard, but maybe the problem that will be more like not only focusing in triggerfish, just in the whole ecology and the ecosystem that will support the triggerfish.
Great. Thank you very much, Jesus. Petrolina, Jesus has a question for you. Will parrot fishing always be banned? What if the population recovers?
This is definitely for me the money question of the day. We don't know. We've been asked this question: how long do we plan to maintain the ban? One of the things that's very absent within our community from our management team is our ability to assess the population. So we are really interested in getting teams in who would be able to help us to do our assessment, to monitor. I mean, we do have 5 MPAs established around Barbuda. We've kind of protected 33% of our ocean. And we really want to understand how well are those MPs doing in meeting the benchmarks that they're supposed to meet, and in particularly looking at the parrotfish population. One of the things that came to our attention throughout the year is in the catches that has been confiscated. We have seen that the size of the parrotfish is, relatively small. I mean, these are fishes that grow up to a good poundage. And our question is, what's the reason for these, for the smaller size of the catch? What is really happening in our waters? So until we have some basic questions answered and understand what is really happening to our population, that information will be able to assist us in making a long-term decision on the ban. And then again, we look at the bigger question on how do we contribute to, how do the waters in Barbuda contribute to the further reaches of the waters throughout the region, and also meeting some of the standards or the goals set by the UN nations. We want to make sure that we're feeding in to all of these at the same time, making sure we are doing our role. So even though we find that our population is doing well, how do we then become a catalyst for other fishery sectors to adapt to the policies and see the impact on their fish stock, because we need to address dissemination of the parrotfish stock.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Petrolina. Ivy, there's a question from Jeff. However, we're running out of time, so I'm going to have you answer that in the chat. But I want to thank all of our panelists for an excellent discussion. It was really amazing to hear about all the amazing work that, all the great work that you're doing across the region. And I hope that we've built some future collaborations here based on all the different aspects of small-scale fisheries work that is being done. And I want to thank our audience for joining us for the small-scale fisheries in the wider Caribbean session. And I invite you to stay tuned for our Fishers Forum, which will be starting in 1 minute. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Have a great day.
Thank you, Eric. And that's a great introduction to our Fishers Forum, where we're going to have several of our past Gladden Memorial Award winners join us here for a great panel discussion and some presentations. So I'm just going to get all the different fishers set up now, and we're just going to transition now to the Fishers Forum. And just for anyone that's new to join in, on the bottom panel, you should see an icon for interpretation. We encourage everyone to use their native language when speaking, because we do have Spanish. We encourage people who speak Spanish or English to use their native language when speaking, because we do have live interpretation available. So we're just going to wait, give it 2 minutes as we transition now to the Fishers Forum. Welcome, Will. I think we're still waiting for a couple more of our fishes to join us, but so far we have a few already here as panelists. So if you want, you can just do some general introductions. Will, you need to unmute.
All right. We'll give it another minute or two, I think. I was just speaking with several folks that should be on here shortly, but anyway, this is very strange. I'm not sure I like this whole GCFI online thing, you know, but we're making do with what we got, right? Anyway, I see Mimi Stafford is on. I see Scott Hickman is on. I just spoke with Cecil, who will be moderating the session. He'll be on here shortly. And I'm hearing from Bertha that she is jumping on here in a minute. Had to drop her daughter off. So anyway, Tylon, another of our speakers, should be on, but I'm not seeing him. Options. Fadila, can you see if Cecil is on here? I'm not seeing him. Maybe I'm not seeing everybody.
He is not on yet.
Okay. Let's see. Meanwhile, I guess I'll start with a couple words while we're waiting for Cecil, our 2019 winner. We're moving into the Fishers Forum. This is an annual event that's been happening since 2004, where we give people an opportunity, fishers an opportunity to really showcase their involvement and leadership in the fishing sector. Okay, Cecil's calling me now. Bear with me for just a second. Guy. Hello? You can't? All right. Thanks.
I already resent him the link.
Thank you. Okay, so Prescott's here. Yeah, he apparently didn't have the link, but he should have it now. Fadila just resent it. Let's see. I'm not seeing Prescott, but he proves that he can see me. So can we see everybody on this thing, Fadila? Sorry.
Currently, I have it set where the person speaking is the one that is visible.
Okay.
So when for the introductions, we'll leave it like this, and then we can have it as a tile view to see everyone at the same time.
I see, okay. But if I click on attendees, I can see all the people that are signed in?
Yes.
Okay, super. Okay. Well, anyway, welcome everyone. We're moving forward. Our moderator, Cecil Marquez, should be on shortly. But meanwhile, I'm seeing we have lots of folks attending, and I'm grateful for that. It was interesting. I spent a lot of time in the last couple of days looking over the history of what's happening and the suite of winners that we have, Gladding Memorial Award winners from all over the basin. And it's astonishing the kind of depth, and diversity of fishers that we have on board. And the kind of work that's being done all over the basin is so impressive. And I just, I sometimes forget, well, is this really what is important? But when you start to look at all of the fantastic conservation work that is being done by GMA winners and other fishers around the basin, in terms of supporting research and leading conservation efforts and educating community members. The integrity of fishers in this whole process is something that can't be understated. And so that's, I think, why I'm continuously engaged and excited about this opportunity. And it looks like Cecil has joined us, so I am going to pass the microphone and camera on to him as our moderator for the 2021 Fishers Forum. Cecil, are you there?
Cecil, you can unmute and put on your video. I think we lost him again. Apologies for these little technical issues, everyone. So we will get started in a few minutes.
I see him here. Okay, I see him now. There he is. I think you're muted, Cecil, but we see you at least.
All right. You hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Those little glitches, eh?
Yeah.
Okay, so good day, everyone, and welcome to the Fisheries Forum GCFI74. I am Cecil Marquez, the 2018 GMA winner, and I'll be the moderator for this session. Firstly, let us thank the Supreme Being and Master for giving us the opportunity once more to be able to interact with each other in this special way. Secondly, to the folks who made all this happen through unflinching support and steadfast, tireless work. Ruth, Will, Fadila, Maria, Don, Michelle, Scott, Bertha, and everyone on the GMA committee. And thirdly, to all GMA winners and other fisher folks and attendees who are joining us today to be part of what we have here now, this wonderful forum. A warm welcome to all. I am honored and elated to perform the role of facilitator today. I must admit that I'm wondering if I can follow in the wake of Don, who has done this job for many years. I would like to take this opportunity to remind folks that we are still reeling, fisher folks, we are still reeling from the aftershocks and fallouts of this dreaded COVID-19. It has threatened our very core existence, our way of life, disrupted national economies, and cast a dark and challenging pathway for the future of small-scale fisheries. We now have to tighten our belts and find new and innovative ways and channels to face what lies ahead. We are under the theme today of recognizing the role of SSF in sustainable livelihood and conservation in small island states and the greater Caribbean. I might joke here a bit, the Keys, we might consider them as small states, islands, okay? So we are graced here with some very important people in the industry. And I might mention at this time, a lady by the name of Mimi Prescott, Winsbert, and Tylan Joseph. I might add also that for listeners, the GMA Award is given every year to people who have contributed to the sustainability of fisher folks' livelihood and conservation every year. Unfortunately, last year we had that demise of the COVID. So as a result, we have chosen, the committee, to give 2 awards, one to a lady and one to a man, to provide that kind of balance in gender. So if I may, and I don't want to take too long, if I may start off by introducing the 2021 winner. The first winner, a lady by the name of Mimi Prescott. But just before I go into that, we've had over 20 Gladden awardees. So this year, I believe it makes up 20. We had 19, we had 18, and then the addition 2 of Prescott and Mimi. Now, the Gladden, like I said, the Gladden Award is presented every year for outstanding contribution and that kind of impact, to create that kind of impact in towards small scale fisheries development and conservation. So Mimi, by the way, I would like to give the rules of engagement. When one is speaking, I would like the mics to be muted so that we don't have any cross interference. There'll be enough time for everyone to speak. So I think we should get the ball rolling. The first speaker I'll call on is Mimi. I don't need to go, and I'll use the old adage, ladies first. So I don't need to go into the bio, the whole bio. It's available, and that would take up a lot of our time. So if I may, I would like the first speaker to come up and give a presentation. That's Mimi Stafford.
Cecil, I'm going to play a video that Mimi has prepared first. So I'm going to do that now, okay?
Great.
This meeting is being recorded.
Hi, my name is Mimi Stafford. My husband Simon and I came to the Keys in the early 70s, fresh out of college, where we'd studied oceanography and marine biology, and we had thought we would get jobs in our field, but there were very few available in the Keys at that time. And as it happened, we became commercial fishermen, as we just enjoyed being on and under the water. And we've had a good life, ended up staying all these years and raising our family here, and our son has remained part of the fishing industry. He grew up fishing for sponges with me when he was little, and stone crabs, also would go on our stone crab boat. And then he has now graduated to running, he's the captain of the Key Limey, the 43-foot Torres. And my husband has come back more or less with me on Pac-Man, which is a 24-foot T-craft. We have enjoyed being a part of the Keys environment and part of the Keys fishery. and would like for the future to be a brighter place for the next generation. We've been involved in a lot of environmental protection for the fisheries and for the environment as a whole, and have great concern about the general degradation that I have seen over the years. My husband Simon and I were involved in the discussions of the trap production program for the lobster fishery and eventually for the stone crab fishery as well. Having been involved in having a science background basically, and having traveled and seen other fisheries, we believed that our fishery was overcapitalized and thought that the only way there was going to be a future to reduce the number of effort in the fishery. And that would also give the fishermen a business, basically, to be able to sell when they got older. And I've also been involved more recently in doing some restoration work with sponge loss due to hurricanes and environmental changes. Shelley Kruger, our local Florida Extension Cooperative Extension agent, shares a passion for sponges with me, and we have done quite a good restoration project on the Atlantic side. We've got about 15 or 1,600 cuttings that we have placed on the sea bottom, and they're doing really well and kind of restoring the environment. When I was young, I thought that my generation would leave the world a better place, and I've been a little disappointed that things have deteriorated as much as they have, and I think we've got a lot of work to do. And I think if we work together for solutions, there still is hope. I don't find it possible to give up, but it is a bit discouraging to see the lack of attention on climate change issues and the environment in general. I have grandchildren now. I have one here and a little boy here and a little boy in Australia. My daughter emigrated to Australia, where she and her husband are professors, they're economists out there, and they have one child and another one on the way. And I would really love to think that the world is a hopeful and a brighter, better place for them to grow up in. So I really would love to encourage as many people as are willing to get involved in solutions. Pick something that speaks to you and act on it. And thank you very much. I so appreciate the award and the nomination. Thank you very much, Don DeMaria, for that. And hope that I can meet people in the future and make some difference. Thank you.
Oh, Lord.
Back to you, Cecil. Your video was looking fine. I think you just need to re-enable it.
Okay. I was wondering if it was better now.
It's not on right now. You need to turn on your video.
All right.
There we go.
Okay. I suppose that you're hearing me now.
Yes, we can.
Great. Mimi, wonderful, wonderful. Welcome to the family, welcome to the team. And I hope that next year we shall be able to see each other and exchange what we know about the marine environment and about fishing. Wonderful. Okay, so we're moving on. Mr. Prescott Smith, I think we're ready for you. Are you there?
Prescott hasn't joined us yet, so we can probably keep moving on, and then we can come back to Prescott when he's able to join. if you want, you
Great.
can do a brief introduction to Prescott, and then whenever he joins, we can have him speak.
Okay. You want me to do it, right?
Yes.
Prescott has been chosen as one of the awardees this year. Prescott comes with a long bio and very impressive. I think he's really worthy of this award. And we need more people like Prescott to come out and challenge what's happening in the region and the world. We would put out our tentacles to look for people like Prescott. So I'm really, in local terms, I'm really bigging up Prescott here. I haven't met the guy, but from what I've read and what I've seen, he's quite an impressive guy. So I hope that next year, God's willing, if we have, if we are around, we can share unforgettable moments. All of us in the family of GCFI and GMA winners. So we shall wait until he comes in, and then probably I could move on to Winsbert Harry. Is Mr. Harry around?
Winsbert has also prepared a video, which I will share now.
Hello, good morning, each and everyone. My name is Winsbert Harry. I'm a fisherman from St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I'm the president of the National Fisher Folks Cooperative in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I'm also the vice chairman of the Caribbean Network of Fisher Folks Organization, the CNFO. I'm a fisherman by profession. As we celebrate World Ocean Day, I'm very thankful to the forum to welcoming me and to inviting me to share my knowledge as a fisherman. Life at sea with Winsbert Harry was not an easy one, and my hope for the future as a fisherman is real ups and downs. But the fishing industry contributes to the food security of the whole world, and it contributes to the GDP of the economy of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Life at sea is not easy at all, because being a fisherman, you take a tremendous risk of your life going out in the morning and return at evening the way we fish in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Fisher folks in the red zone is very deeply impacted. Up to today, they are not known when and how they will apply their trade and go back home to their own home that was destroyed from the last ashes of the volcano. Today we are still having an active volcano, and fisher folks in those zones were asked not to go back in those zones yet. So as the president, I reached out to my regional organization at St. Lucia Fishermen's Cooperative, the Goodwill Fishermen's Cooperative, to assist. I journey across to St. Lucia on April 16 to collect relief supply to see how best I could assist my members and fisher folks in the red zone with food and water. We journey to St. Lucia where we collect relief supply, but on our way back home, Winsbert Harry encountered another difficulty again. Our boat was sink with all our relief supply. After swimming for 3.5 hours in the ocean for my life, we was rescued by 3 St. Lucian fishermen who then take us back to the V4 port in St. Lucia. I encountered multiple serious burns on my skin. I had to seek medical attention, that I had to spend almost a day and some into the hospital. The captain of the boat, Sunrise, Sunshine Angel. He lost the boat, and we lost the engine, we lost all our equipment, and we lost everything that we had. It was a tremendous effort for me as a fisherman and as a president of the National Fisher Folks to see how best I could assist and to reach out to my suffering brothers who had to leave their homes and leave their families behind to accept a new home into shelters. So with this, I would like to thank each and everyone sharing my story as a young fisherman. As I will say again, that fishing is a very serious high risk, and tremendous to all my tragedies and my troubles I face at sea, I will still continue to fish.
And Cecil, you can go ahead and unmute and continue.
You hearing me, right?
Yes, there's an echo, but I'll try and deal with that.
And then you see me also.
1 second, there is an echo somewhere. Are you listening on 2 devices?
Yes, so I better turn off.
Yeah, you need to turn one off.
Okay. There you go. All right. Quite an experience, quite a harrowing experience, Winsbert. We wish you all the best in your recoveries, and we wish you all the best in your fishing endeavors, because we know that fishing is probably the most dangerous work on earth. United Nations has dubbed it that. So we as fishers, we know the risk, we know the good times and the bad times, and we must cherish every day, every moment that we are able to go out and bring food back to take care of our families, to help in national development, and so on and so forth. So we'll catch up sometime, maybe next year, who knows. Thank you very much for your presentation, and you probably could hang around, that there might be questions coming your way, considering that kind of experience. So all the best, my friend. Is Prescott ready?
No, we're still having some connection issues with him, so we can keep moving on.
Okay, so I'm sure that Thailand might be ready.
Yes, so I also have a video from Thailand, which I'll show right now.
Okay.
Oh, I think actually we might have Prescott. No, I don't see him. I'll play Thailand's video, and then hopefully by then we'll have Prescott.
Fadila, I have a dark screen. What's the matter here?
I just have my video turned off, that's all.
Oh, okay. All right.
Good morning. My name is Tylon Joseph. I'm a fisher from Grenada and a board member of the Goa Fisherman Cooperative Society.
Still
Limited.
waiting for the video.
I'm also
right?
a student of the St. George's University, studying marine and wildlife conservation biology.
Cecil, we are playing a video right now.
Okay.
I'm also a participant and a facilitator in the Caribbean Network of Fisher Folk Organization Leadership Institute. The CNFO's Leadership Institute was established on the 1st of April 2020. This was made possible through the partnership of the Stewardfish Project with UWI CERMES. Leadership training is being offered annually to build the capacity of small-scale fishers.
Has the video started?
In a challenging environment.
Hello?
Yes, Cecil, the video is on right now.
But I'm not seeing anything, you know, like.
Okay, I will stop and reshare then.
Yes.
Good morning. My name is Tylon Joseph. I'm a fisher from Grenada and a board member of the Guav Fishermen Cooperative Society Limited. I'm also a student of the St. George's University, studying marine and wildlife conservation biology. I'm also a participant and a facilitator in the Caribbean Network of Fisherfolk Organization Leadership Institute. The CNFO's Leadership Institute was established on the 1st of April 2020. This was made possible through the partnership of the Stewardfish Project with UWI Surmies. Leadership training is being offered annually to build the capacity of small-scale fishers in a challenging environment. The CNFO Training Institute is creating an avenue for fisherfolks and fisherfolk leaders of member states to build their leadership capabilities in a familiar and relatable environment. So these are some components that have been highlighted from the Leadership Institute training thus far. So there's a leadership curricula which is divided into modules. It is tailored to fisherfolk needs, and fisherfolks are free to participate in the modules that most suit them, although we do encourage participation in all of the modules. One of the Institute's main focus has centered on building awareness of the Caribbean community, common fisheries policies, and the SSF guideline protocol, the small scale fisheries guideline protocol, which is incorporated within the Caribbean community common fisheries policy. The Leadership Institute organizations such as UWI Surmies, Canary, UWI Chirp has made use of this platform while implementing project activities. To this end, we have partnered with them to carry out workshops such as the Stewardfish Project, and which incorporates the Leadership Institute. I myself have participated in the Leadership Institute, where I gave a presentation the first year on relationship management, and year 2, I was the prime custodian of opening up the Leadership Institute, where I gave the first presentation on leading fisherfolks and establishing vision, mission, and goals within fisherfolk organization. Right? Mentoring is a big component of the Leadership Institute, right? So fisherfolks have been given the opportunity to facilitate, like I just mentioned before. And before you get that opportunity, you have a mentorship where Mitch Lay, who was the Gladden 2009 Memorial winner, and Nadine Nemhad, the secretary of the CNFO. As peer-to-peer facilitation is encouraged by the Leadership Institute. So there's also a forum for open discussion and collective dynamic sharing. The Leadership Institute has created a WhatsApp group where participants can have a discussion or share experiences on topics of interest of that which is being discussed during trainings. There's a library of resources and documents for learning. The leadership is creating its library, which includes the book Leading Fisherfolks, written by Catherine Blackman and Sharon Almarigi, which we considered our go-to manual, especially when developing PowerPoint presentations for the training sessions. The library has also served a repository for documentation, such as used in trainings, sessions facilitated by our partners when using the Leadership Institute platform. These are some achievements highlighted from the Leadership Institute thus far. There's it's tailored specifically to fisherfolks. There's a peer-to-peer capacity building, right? There's an interconnected relationship amongst the fishers through the Caribbean region, through the different fisherfolk organization that facilitates growth and development and learning. There's a learning and usage of different virtual teaching methods and platforms. So there's some ICT development. Fishers transition from participants to facilitators through mentoring. So you have a trainer of trainers component, strengthening partnerships for fisherfolk development, regional partners using the Leadership Institute in the execution of the activities. So there's a relationship management and relationship strengthening happening right there. And there's also the collection of sex disaggregated data, which is very hard to come by. And these are some lessons learned from the Leadership Institute thus far. So there's a need to develop the ICT awareness of the fishers. So this platform is something that we're very grateful for, as it's done via technology. So the ICT component is incorporated within this Leadership Institute. There's a clear leadership required in the execution of the Leadership Institute activities. So there's a defining leadership that needs to be highlighted when it comes to leading fisher folks. There's an adapt to deliver activities, right? So there's a need to adapt. There's also shared visions and common interests within the region. So that is something that was highlighted, that even if there's different partners within the region, there's that shared vision and common interest. So the Leadership Institute is tailored, as we mentioned before, specifically for fisher folks. So it's insightful, it's relatable, it's accessible, it's timely, it's evolving, so it's forever changing. As we move forward, we learn. It's engaging, it's invaluable, and it's comprehensible. So looking ahead, so the future of the Leadership Institute. So at this present time, they need some resource mobilization for the continuity of this institute. I personally benefited greatly from it, and I'm positive that there are many fishers out there that can do the same. Increase, and I know that there are many fishers that is currently benefiting heavily from the Leadership Institute. There's an increase in human resources through its mentorship program to manage and operate the institute. So there's more need for leaders. There's expand to include other trainings in relevant areas to improve the life of fisher folks in their businesses as well. So there's need to lengthen on the different modules and explain and stress a little bit more on different components. And there's a need for organizations to increase the visibility and promote development of the small scale fishers. So this is the short presentation. I want to say thank you for everyone that made the Leadership Institute possible. You have UWI Sermes, the Stewardfish Project, Canary, UWI Chirp, and most importantly, the Caribbean Network of Fisherfolk Organization, which is the implementing body that facilitated this Leadership Institute for the past 2 years. And this is the contact information. You have the Twitter, the Facebook, and the email where you can contact the CNFO if you're interested in the Leadership Institute or in whatever projects that the CNFO is engaging in. Thank you.
Thank you, Tylon. I'm just going to try and figure out something with Prescott, and he also has a video to share. So 1 second. I believe Prescott has been able to enable his mic and video. Prescott?
Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Prescott.
Okay, perfect.
I'm just looking for your video, so I will give it a second because I haven't received it. But feel free to go ahead and introduce yourself, and we can always play the video after.
Okay. Well, hello everyone. My name is Prescott Smith from the Bahamas, and I'm very passionate about conservation, not just for the preservation of the resources for the Bahamas, but what they mean to us all in the entire Gulf region and throughout the world. And what drove me to get involved in this, I saw how generally in many cases conservation was not taken into consideration, how locals can use the resources in their environment to support themselves and their families in a sustainable way. I also saw that in our region that, and I'm speaking about the Caribbean in general, that the economic development model that was chosen was a direct collision path with preserving these resources. And many times the local communities are left vulnerable, waiting for the next major development in terms of job creation that in most cases permanently destroy the resources that really belong to us all. And so my father was the first Bahamian to build a fishing lodge. And so for me, growing up in the fly fishing industry, I found it was a means by which you could promote really empowering local communities. But I am equally passionate about all areas when it comes to using these resources in a sustainable way. 1 second, am I able to share my screen with you?
Yes, you should be able to, Prescott.
Okay. Are you able to see the screen?
Yes, I think you should just put it on slideshow. We can just see all the different slides right now.
Okay, I will. Thank you very much. So I'm going to start here from the Bahamas. Okay. In my study of conservation model as it's practiced throughout the world, I found that in most cases, our environment is permanently being destroyed because you have, in many cases, a conflicting model that does not take into consideration the local population in a sustainable way. So when you think of the Bahamas, I see these resources belonging to whether you live in Jamaica, Dominican Republic, Cuba, the Gulf region, because during my time in our defense force, as I traveled throughout the Bahamas, many countries extract marine resources from the environment of the Bahamas. I remember a female astronaut, an American I fished, and she shared with me how the Bahamas not only had the largest mangrove nursery system in the Caribbean, but the entire Western world. And it became very clear to me that while we might be caretakers of these resources, so many countries are dependent on them. The work that I've been involved in is met oftentimes with lots of resistance because you have persons would rather extract such resources that exist in our country, and in most cases, It's about generating tremendous wealth for just short-term model and approach as opposed to long-term. So the Bahamas not only has the largest flats in the world, the largest nursery system, the largest amount of blue hole, many other resources. So when you look at the marine life, these things are connected to the entire Gulf region. Nature does not function with the lines that we draw on the map. Many of the bird life that are in your backyards are also here in the Bahamas at different times of the year. This slide shows you the concentration of mangroves. And so while I'm highlighting that more might be here in the Bahamas, they are not viewed by me as belonging. We just happen to be caretakers, and it's no different than you looking after your environments individually in the countries where you live. And so things that are some of the great threats to us is while we have the purest limestone in the world, those things are in great demand from many countries around the world who would like to extract, and oftentimes they are extracted with the destruction and permanent altering of the natural environment. Fidelia, you can let me know when you want to share the video.
It still hasn't shown up in my email yet. But
I'm able to, if you would like for me to do it from here.
sure, if you want, you can end this presentation and show your 2-minute video.
Okay, I will do it for you. 1 second. I will share my screen again.
I think you're sharing the PowerPoint again, Prescott.
Yes. It's can you try it one more time from your side, or?
I still haven't received it from you. That's
Okay.
why I can't share it.
Okay.
And just to give a little update, we have about 20 minutes left for the entire, okay, I think we have
Yes.
it now.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Prescott. I think we had a little bit of issue with the sound, but once you send that video to me, I'll make sure it's uploaded onto the app so that everyone can view it again. Also, we only have about 15 minutes left for this session. So I think I'm going to hand it back over to Cecil so we can start wrapping up. So thank you again, Prescott. And Cecil, I'll hand it back to you. Cecil, you'll need to, I think we've lost Cecil. Oh wait, let me get Cecil back. Cecil, please enable your mic and video. And if anyone has any questions for any of the panelists or any of the presentations you've had, please feel free to use the question and answer box or chat, and we will relay those questions to the speakers. Cecil.
How about that? Are you hearing me?
Yes, there we go, Cecil.
All right. Quite an interesting fellow, Prescott. I would want more time to look at his video and to listen to more of the presentation. I guess that would come later on. So now we can have Mimi to speak briefly. I've been told that she might be able to speak to us briefly. Is Mimi on?
Yes, Mimi's here. She'll just need to enable her mic.
Great, right.
Hello. How are you?
Hello, Mimi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes,
I'm hear you fine, Mimi.
All right, thank you.
I'm hearing you clearly, and I'm dying to meet you in person.
Well, thank you.
You are quite a lady, very strong lady.
Don't know about that, but I look forward to a time when people can get together, because it would seem like there's a lot of really wonderful efforts that are, no, don't take them away, Jean. I want my grandbaby is this, he's going to steal the show.
Okay.
He's a lot of the reason, you know, that I think this is important, and he's been squealing in the background. So he's the real key.
Oh, okay. So,
yeah, he's been loving this presentation.
Great.
This is a lot of the reason I think it's so important too. I agree with Prescott. I agree with the other people that were speaking earlier that, you know, I'd like to leave the world a better place. And, you know, it makes me sad that I thought we would, and we've got an awful lot of work to do, like I said in the video. So, you know, I've got one here, I've got one in Australia and another one on the way. And to me, it's their world, you know, they're the ones that are going to inherit this. And we need to find ways to work together to, you know, look at the issues as they really are, not as we wish they were, and find some solutions.
Great. Well,
he wants the computer.
Well, I didn't, you weren't wrong when I said that. Welcome to the family. Welcome to the GMA winners. It's quite an honor. And I believe we should cherish that moment. We are all in conservation and fishing. And it's something that the world would want from us, you know, later on, like you said. And I am committed, and I would wish that everyone who received that award will be fully committed to the end, right? We must go out and make friends and influence people and get people to join our crusade, because later on we might not have a beautiful world. So Mimi, I really appreciate the efforts that you've made, and we shall see sometime.
Yeah, I look forward to that. And thank you very much. I mean, it's really an honor. And I would actually just like to thank Dora Di Maria, Don's daughter, for helping me put that video together, because it's not my strong suit. we dug through archives, and some other friends helped too, because I just thought, oh, I I don't know what to put out there. So thank you, Dora DiMaria, as well as Don DiMaria and Will Hyman and the other people who've been involved in the process. I very much appreciate it. And I look forward to meeting everybody in person one of these days.
Great, yes, I'm God willing. Okay.
So to all the attendees who are here today, we welcome any questions or comments from you in the chat or the question and answer box. So we'll leave a couple minutes for people to pose any questions to our presenters and panelists today. And Cecil, while we wait to see if there are any questions, do you want to share any perspectives since becoming a GMA winner since 2018, what you've been up to, what this award has meant to you?
Okay, well, I've been in this industry for the last 40 years, and I've seen it grown from a very primitive way up to what it is today. I can speak about Grenada more than anywhere else because Grenada is a big exporting fish country to the United States, and we depend heavily on the export of yellowfin tuna. But then I got involved in conservation. I noticed that we were losing a lot of our species, especially the flying fish. And I decided, well, something must be done. So I started advocating for control of nets and a lot of the ways that we fish, and trying to have some policy changes. And then since winning the GMA award, I've been very active in trying to recruit our local fishermen to adapt to lots of changes that are taking place as regard to climate change. We are losing our coastlines, our reef disappearing, species disappearing. So I've been trying to get people to understand the importance of protecting your marine ecosystem and the fish stocks. Added to that, I've been named a small-scale policy champion, fisheries policy champion, and I'm trying very hard to recruit women into this fray of things. I have been successful to a point in having some actual fisher women that go into the deep, which is very interesting, that go into the deep like men and fish. And later on, I'll try and form a national fisher women organization so they can share experiences from different parts of the island and get together as one body. Lately, we are working on a EBA project, which involves removal of derelicts, removal of lost gear, removal of all the stuff that clog the reefs and inhibit the livelihood of the seine operators. We've looked at the riparian area from the hills down, and we are trying to get people to adapt to best practices, right? And, some of the people have been practicing some very, very bad agricultural practices. So we are trying very hard to do that also. So in a nutshell, this is what I've been doing since winning the award, right? And I have no regrets. In fact, it has galvanized me to do more, right? To look into the future, to look at how we might, or children might have to live later on. And I have no regrets. In fact, I think I'm a little late in doing it. So these are some of my perspectives and things, and I hope that my fellow GME winners would reach out, spread their tentacles, and encompass lots and lots of others to join our struggle, because we have a big struggle on. So, Fadila, I think I should stop here.
Thank you, Cecil. I see Winsbert has his hand raised. Winsbert, do you want to share something? I think we lost Winsbert. Okay, we lost Winsbert.
And I probably would add that I've seen a big change in the standard of living of fisher folks. I should have mentioned that before. The industry has raised the bar in the standard of living of ordinary fisher folks. Fisher folks are now able to send their children to good schools, take good care of them, build a nice home, and live a decent life. So I think that there is so much benefit in the fishing industry, and one should really embrace the opportunity before it's too late.
Hello, I'm back.
Winsbert has joined us.
Yes. First, let me say very thanks to Mayor and Prescott. Welcome aboard as the 2019 GMA winner. I could say, well, we are not able to meet face to face. This is the first virtual conference for GCFI. I think I welcome it as well with a new platform. We might have to adapt to it, but I could say as the GMA winner in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I think we was hit with the eruption of the volcano in April, and now with the pandemic, because right now the fisher folks are really losing a lot of income because of the ash and the mud flow that come down from the volcano end up straight into the sea. So right now our shorelines, our corals are all destroyed up to the red zone on the windward and the northern side of the island, and the fisher folks into the green and the yellow zone. They are having problems now fishing because they cannot see very clearly at the bottom of the water. We see a very decline in our inshore species because of the every time rain come, these mud flow come down and everything end up into the seawater. So there's a very serious decline in that. And one thing I like to say, as the GMA winner in 2019, I was able to come back to St. Vincent and the Grenadines and work on a project which is with Canary under the Straight Fish Project. I want to thank them for their support and the supporting the SPG NFO and my idea in terms of fish compost and fish silage. We are encouraging the fisher folks not to throw the fish waste into the seas to take the coral inshore, and turn them into fish compost that we could distribute them to the farmers. Also with the fish silage, so we utilizing the waste of the fish and turn it into profitability for the fishers now. So that's something I'm really working on as the GMA winner, and I'm encouraging other fishers in St. Vincent to get on board with that project. But we see that we will need some assistance going forward with the project, because I know that the funding has run out, but it's something I will encourage the rest of the members of the Caribbean Network of Fisher Folks Organization, which is the CNFO, is to get involved in getting the fisher folks to utilize the fish waste instead of dump them into the sea. But I could say thank you very much for inviting me to this forum here, and for the other attendees. I give you a pleasure that you could have joined us and attending the Fisheries Forum at this year's GCFI virtual. And with that, I will hand back to Mr. Cecil Marquez.
Great. Well, but well said, you know. Very well said. I know you have the zest and the strength and the aptitude to do that and a lot more. So in the future, we're looking like, working together, binding together, bonding together, and to achieve that objective that has been the vision of Peter Gladden, the great man Peter Gladden. So I would encourage you to continue and encourage others, like you say. Fadila, we are running close on closing time.
Yes, so I think if you have any closing words, now would be the time to do that, and then I will wrap up. Great.
So may I conclude by saying this has been a very wonderful conference. It's hard. People are not, some of us are not really used to the technologies of the day. We get in there anyway. But what I believe came out of this conference is a lot of information, a lot of knowledge that some of us and the wider community would not have had the opportunity to access. I wish everyone all the best, and we shall continue to work hard and work harder. And like I said before, spreading our tentacles to trap the others out there. And by doing that, we might just have a chance of saving our environment and saving this beautiful world of ours. I thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cecil. And I would like to thank all of our panelists. Let me turn back on my video. I would like to thank all our panelists from today. Just going to put some mute in so we don't have any background. Yes, so I would like to thank everyone. Also, we want to give special thank you to all our fishers who worked so hard to prepare their videos, and also their support for helping them to prepare some really professionally done things. I see Prescott has his hand up. Prescott, we are running low on time, so any intervention you make should only be about a minute. Thanks.
Thank you. I don't need a minute. I want to say thank you to those who recommended me for an historic award, and I accept it on behalf of all of us, and the fight for a true conservation model in our region. And so I look forward to working with our brothers and sisters throughout the Gulf and the Caribbean. And like I say, you have made history and have done more for changing the direction of things in the Bahamas. With this, I accept it on that behalf. And I look forward, like I say, to working with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Prescott. And also to close, I want to thank all of our panelists for today. Let me just finish this. And I would also like to remind you all that later today at 6 p.m. Eastern time, which would be 7 p.m. Atlantic Standard Time, and I believe 5 p.m. Central Time, we will be having a very informal social, just a way for you to get to meet some of the other attendees. And also I'd like to encourage everyone that even though you might have seen some of the fishers here today, we and all of our other presenters, you can interact, you can continue the discussions via our app Hoover. So you can just look for a participant and continue that discussion either individually, or you can start a new community board thread. So please don't let these sessions be the end of the discussions. We encourage you to keep interacting, keep engaging, and keep the GCFI family strong. So I thank you all for attending today, and we hope to see you later at our very informal social later today. Grab a drink and just come meet some of us. And then tomorrow, once again, we will be starting at 9 a.m. Eastern time, which is 10 a.m. Atlantic Standard Time, and I believe 8 Central Time. So thank you again, and also a very, very special thank you to our interpreters, Vivian and Sylvia, who have been providing excellent live interpretation for you today, and they will be working tremendously hard for the rest of the week. So thank you to both Vivian and Sylvia for your interpretation this week. So thank you again to everyone. And let me just make sure there aren't any pressing comments in the chat. And there are not. So thank you again to everyone. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow or later today for the social. Thanks.